The air was thick. Day 3. It had a weight to it, a pressure that had nothing to do with the heat. Through the grimy window of my apartment, the sky was a sick, rusty color. It had been that way since the sun came up, casting long, distorted shadows that made the empty street below look like a wound. The sirens had mostly stopped. That was worse than when they were constant. Now there were only echoes, punctuated by a distant pop that might have been a gunshot or a backfiring car. I didn't know which was better. The power had died yesterday. The water this morning. I had turned the faucet out of habit and got a cough of air and a dribble of brown sludge. The hum of the refrigerator was gone. My laptop was a black rectangle of useless plastic. Civilization had a sound, and its absence was a physical presence in the room. My head still ached. A low, persistent throb behind my eyes that started after the fever broke on the first day. The fever had been a fire, leaving me shivering in a pool of my own sweat. When I woke up, the world was broken, and something inside me was new. I looked at the bedroom. The door was open. It was full, wall to wall, floor to nearly the ceiling. Stacks of instant ramen in their bright plastic wrappers. Cases of bottled water, their clear surfaces reflecting the dull red light. My hand rested on the last, original pack of ramen on my kitchen counter. It felt real, solid. The others felt just as real, just as solid. I had touched this single pack, felt a deep, gut-wrenching pull, and an identical one had appeared beside it. The first time, I almost passed out. The headache had been a white-hot spike. The 10th time, it was just a throb. The 100th, a familiar weariness. I had spent all of yesterday doing it. Touch, pull, a new object appeared. The cost was a dizzying fatigue, a draining of energy that left my muscles trembling. But now, in the stillness of my apartment, I was a king on a throne of processed noodles and purified water. It was the only security that mattered anymore. I had used a replicated door lock, a perfect copy of my Medeco deadbolt, to add a second lock to the inside of my front door. It was a crude fix, but it was metal and it was strong. I was sealed in. My phone buzzed. I froze. The sound was a violation, an artifact from the other time. It buzzed again on the countertop, a frantic, desperate vibration. The screen lit up, a picture of her, smiling. Jessica. The name was a taste of ash in my mouth. Before, her calls were an annoyance. Now, it was a threat. How was the network even up? It had to be sputtering, one last gasp before it died for good. I stared at it. The buzzing was the only sound in the universe. I answered. My thumb was steady. Leo? Her voice was tinny, laced with static and something else. Hysteria. Oh my God, you're still alive. I was so worried. I said nothing. I listened to her breathing, fast and shallow. Listen, Leo, you need to get out of there. It's bad, really bad. There was a man's voice in the background, muffled. Chad says the freaks are all over downtown. Chad, of course, the son of some city councilman, with a jaw thicker than his neck and a trust fund to match. The guy she'd left me for. Are you even listening? She snapped, her fake concern evaporating. You can't just hide in your little box, Leo. That's what you always do. Useless. Chad's got his father's old security guys with him. They're clearing out the convenience store downstairs. They have a plan. You should come with us. You can be useful. Carry things. The man's voice, clearer now. Chad. Jess, who are you talking to? Is that the nerd? Tell him to bring whatever food he's got. We're running low. A muffled sound. Her hand over the phone. Then, her voice, sickly sweet again. Leo, did you hear? Just bring whatever you have. We'll take care of you. It's your only chance. My eyes drifted from the phone to the bedroom door, to the mountain of supplies within. A fortress of calories, a lake of hydration. I thought of them, down there, fighting over a dusty can of beans and a half-empty bottle of soda. Chad, with his hired muscle, posturing like a king of the ashes. Jessica, clinging to him. I felt a coldness spread from my chest, a pressure building behind my eyes, different from the headache. It was the other thing that came with the power. A silent weight. I could almost feel her flinch on the other end of the line, a sudden unease she couldn't name. Leo? Her voice was uncertain for the first time. I pressed the red icon on the screen. The connection died. The silence rushed back in, clean and complete. My hand didn't shake. I felt nothing for her. Not anger, not sadness. It was like looking at a photograph of a stranger. A crash from the street below. Shouting. The sounds were sharp in the quiet air. I walked to the window, staying to the side, peering down through the gap in the blinds. I could see the entrance to the 24/7 market. A crowd of people, maybe a dozen, were shoving at the glass doors. Chad's group was inside. One of his security guys, a big man in a tactical vest, shoved a smaller man back. The man fell. The crowd surged like a single, hungry animal. It was ugly, desperate. They were fighting for crumbs. I turned away from the window. My gaze fell on the heavy oak bookshelf against the far wall. It was filled with old paperbacks and the plastic figurines I used to collect. A lifetime of hobbies that meant nothing now. It was heavy, solid. I walked over to it. I placed my palm flat against the wood. I closed my eyes and focused. The pull came, deeper this time, more violent. It felt like a hook sinking into my spine. The headache flared, a flash of white light behind my eyelids. A wave of dizziness made me stumble back. Thump. The sound was heavy, solid. I opened my eyes. Next to the original bookshelf stood another one. An exact copy. The same grain in the wood, the same tiny scratch on the second shelf, the same layer of dust. It was real. I shoved it. It didn't budge. My breath was heavy. My body felt like lead. The cost for something this large was immense. But it was worth it. I braced myself. My hands raw, my muscles screaming. I began to push the new bookshelf across the floor. The legs scraped against the wood laminate, a sound that set my teeth on edge. Inch by inch, I moved it, until its back was pressed hard against my front door. It covered the entire frame, a solid wall of oak. I leaned against it, gasping for air. It wasn't enough. I looked at my large metal desk. My heavy, steel-framed bed. I spent the next hour in a haze of pain and effort. Touch, pull, thump. A new desk appeared. Shove, grunt, scrape. I wedged it behind the bookshelf. Touch, pull, thump. A copy of my bed frame. I didn't have the strength to move it. I collapsed onto the floor, my vision swimming. My apartment was no longer a home. It was a tomb, a fortress. The entrance was a solid, multi-layered barricade of wood and steel. No one was getting in. Later, I found an old battery-powered radio. I spent 10 minutes fiddling with the dial, getting only static. Then, a voice cut through. Repeat, this is a broadcast from the 7th Infantry Division. Designated safe zones have been established. Do not travel at night. Seek shelter, remain indoors. Hostile infected individuals. Exercise extreme caution. The voice was calm, professional, but it was lost in a sea of static. Safe zones. Where? How could anyone get to them? It was a ghost's voice, a memory of a world that was already gone. Then I heard it, a new sound, closer than the radio, closer than the street. From the hallway, a low, wet, gurgling sound. A groan that wasn't human. It was followed by a slow, shuffling drag. Something was out there, one of them, the infected. The word felt inadequate. I turned the radio off. The silence was back, but now it was different. It was listening. I sat on the floor, my back against the cold wall, my eyes fixed on my barricaded door. The shuffling faded down the hall. Time passed. The red light outside began to deepen into a bruised purple. I ate a dry block of ramen, chewing the crunchy noodles slowly, washing it down with a bottle of water. The taste was bland, but it was fuel. Then came the new sounds. Footsteps. Heavy. More than one person. They were coming up the stairs, not shuffling. These were human steps. Confident. They stopped on my landing. Right outside my door. This is the one, a voice said. It was deep, gravelly. One of the security guys. Are you sure? Another voice. Younger. Arrogant. Chad. Looks like no one's home. The light's been out for a day, boss. But the girl said he's a hermit. Never goes out. He's in there. A pause. I held my breath. My heart was a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. I could feel the pressure of their presence through the wood and metal. My focus narrowed on the door, on the space just beyond it. I felt the familiar weight behind my eyes, the coldness spreading. A silent push. Well, fucking knock, Chad said, his voice a little strained, as if fighting off a sudden chill. Let's see what our little friend has for us. There was a moment of quiet. A breath held on the other side. Boom. The impact was not a knock. It was a blow. The entire barricade, the desk and the bookshelf, shuddered. A fine powder of dust rained down from the ceiling. The solid wood of the door groaned in protest. Boom. Harder this time. A crack splintered the air. Not from my door. From theirs. They were using a tool. A ram, or an axe. Leo. Chad's voice was a muffled roar through the layers of wood. We know you're in there. Open the door. Be reasonable. We just need to borrow some supplies. Don't make us come in the hard way. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there in the dark, my eyes locked on the barricade. The king in his castle, and the barbarians were at the gate. Boom! The bookshelf jumped. The metal desk behind it ground against the wood. Dust, smelling of old plaster and forgotten years, rained from the ceiling, a fine powder in the dim red light. The entire barricade vibrated, a deep hum that went through the floorboards and into my bones. Boom! A splintering sound. Not my door. The frame. The force of the blow was immense. They had a ram. Leo. Chad's voice was a mangled roar, chewed up by the layers of wood and steel. We know you're in there. Open the door. Be reasonable. We just need to borrow some supplies. Don't make us come in the hard way. I did not move. I sat on the floor, my back flat against the wall. I did not breathe. My world had shrunk to the space between me and the door. My eyes were fixed on the barricade. The pressure behind them intensified. A cold focus. The king in his castle. Boom, boom, boom. The rhythm was frantic now, a desperate, angry drumming. A hinge screamed. The metal of my desk shrieked as it was forced backward another inch. They were strong. There were several of them. But my barricade was heavy. Obstinate. I had made it that way. The pounding stopped. I could hear their breathing, ragged and furious. Fuck this. Chad's voice again. Fucking nerd. When we get in, I'm gonna break his fucking hands. There's gotta be another way. Jessica's voice, a nervous whine. There isn't. We'll be back. The gravelly voice of the security man cut in. We just need a better tool. I heard their footsteps moving away, heavy with failure and threat. They receded down the stairs. The silence they left behind was different. It was not a reprieve. It was a promise. 4 days. The banging did not come back. Something else did. A smell. It crept from under my sealed door, thin at first, then thicker. It was sweet and heavy. The smell of meat left out in the sun. Down the hall, a door had been forced open. I'd heard the splintering wood 2 nights ago, followed by a woman screaming. The screaming did not last long. Now, there was only the smell. The building was a tomb in waiting. The plumbing was dead. The water in the toilet tank was the last drinkable source for most. I knew because I heard them fighting over it. Shouts and the wet thud of a fist hitting flesh. Yesterday, it rained. I watched from my window. The water wasn't clear, it was pale green, and it left an oily, iridescent film on the glass. A man on the street below had tilted his head back, mouth open. A few minutes later, he was on his knees, clawing at his throat, his skin red and blotchy. The rain was poison. Every day, I worked. My life fell into a simple, brutal rhythm. Touch, pull, thump. The cost was still there, a hook in my gut, a draining fatigue. But it was less now. The headache was a dull ache, not a white-hot spike. Practice was making it easier. My body was adapting. My mind was sharpening. I had replicated the half-pack of AA batteries from my old TV remote until I had a crate full. I replicated my sharpest paring knife until I had a dozen. I replicated lighters, bars of soap, clean underwear, socks. The fortress was not just about defense. It was about order. Every morning, I washed myself with a replicated washcloth and a piece of replicated soap. I put on clean, replicated clothes. I was not one of the animals scratching and clawing in the hallways. My focus narrowed. The apartment was a temporary shell. I needed a real fortress. I had touched the city map from my glove compartment. The pull was significant, draining. A second map appeared, a perfect copy. I spread it on the floor. I circled locations with a replicated pen. Warehouses, isolated factories. Then, my eyes caught it. A gated community of mansions in a small valley out in the suburbs. Just one road in or out. High walls. Secluded. Perfect. I was staring at the map when I heard the new sound. A knock. Not a boom. Not a furious assault. It was a weak rap. A fist on wood, with no force behind it. A beggar's knock. I was on my feet, one of the paring knives in my hand. Its replicated plastic handle was slick in my palm. I listened. Leo? Jessica's voice. Thin. Cracked. I moved to the door. I listened to the sounds of my own making, the soft scrape of my shoes. I put my ear to the barricade. I could hear her breathing. It was shallow. Someone else was with her. A rasping sound. Carefully, pushing with my legs, I moved the desk. The noise was loud in the quiet building. I slid the new bookshelf to the side. The original door, scored and dented from their previous assault, was revealed. I looked through the peephole. The hallway was dark. They were shadows, but I could see enough. It was her and Chad. They looked like ghosts. Jessica's hair was matted. There was a long, healing scratch on her cheek. Her clothes were torn and filthy. Chad stood behind her, leaning against the wall. He was thinner. The arrogant set of his jaw was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed exhaustion. A dirty bandage was wrapped around his forearm. "Leo, please," she whispered, her forehead pressed against the door. "We know you're in there. Please, we have nothing left. The security guys, they took everything and left." I remained silent. I just watched them through the small glass lens. "It was Chad's idea," she sobbed, a dry, pathetic sound. "I'm sorry. We were just hungry. Everyone is fighting. People are killing each other for a can of soup." I unlatched my second deadbolt. The sound was a loud clack. I unlocked the primary one. Another clack. I turned the knob. The door opened a few inches, held by the security chain. The smell hit me first. The smell of unwashed bodies, of fierce sweat and spoiled food. It was the smell of the hallway, concentrated on them. Chad's eyes met mine through the gap. He flinched. It was not a conscious movement. A shudder went through his frame, a full body tremor. He took a half step back, his mouth opening and closing without a sound. He looked away, staring at the floor, unable to hold my gaze. The cold pressure that now lived behind my eyes, the silent weight of my will, had pushed him down without a word. Jessica just stared, her eyes wide with a desperate hope. "Leo," I said nothing. I let my gaze rest on her, on the filth and the misery etched into her face. This was the woman who called me useless. This was the man who wanted to take my things and use me to carry them. I turned from the door, leaving it chained. I walked to the mountain of supplies in my bedroom. I could hear her frantic, hopeful breathing from the hall. I looked over the neat stacks of canned goods, the pristine cases of water. I reached down to the floor, where I had tossed the things I deemed unworthy. I picked up a plastic grocery bag. Inside were the broken crumbs and dust from the bottom of a box of instant ramen. I grabbed 2 bottles of water from a case I had replicated badly. The plastic was cloudy and they were near their original expiration date. I walked back to the door. They were still there, waiting like dogs. I pushed the bag and the 2 bottles through the gap. They fell to the filthy carpet in the hallway with a soft thud. Jessica stared at the offering. Her face crumpled. It was not gratitude. It was humiliation. Chad looked at the bag on the floor, then at me. There was no anger in his eyes. Only a deep, hollow fear. He saw the difference. He saw the clean shirt I was wearing, the line of my shaven jaw. He smelled the soap on my skin. He understood. "Go," I said. My voice was level. "Don't let me see you again." I closed the door. The deadbolt slid home. Click. The second one followed. Click. I did not bother moving the barricade back yet. I heard a scrabbling sound in the hall. The crinkle of the plastic bag. A low, guttural argument. Then the sound of them stumbling away down the stairs. I went to my small kitchenette. My power source was a large, deep-cycle marine battery I had replicated from a picture in an old boating magazine. It was connected to a small heating coil. I put a small, replicated frying pan on the coil. It began to heat up. I took a can opener to a can of corned beef hash. The meat plopped into the pan with a satisfying schlump and began to sizzle. The smell filled my small apartment, overpowering the lingering stench from the hall. I took out 2 slices of bread, perfect copies of the last stale piece I had, and put them in the pan to toast in the rendered fat. I spooned replicated instant coffee into a clean mug and poured hot water over it from a kettle heated on the same coil. I sat at my table and ate. The hash was salty and greasy. The bread was crisp. The coffee was hot and bitter. It was the most satisfying meal of my life. Later, I stood at the window, looking out. In the distance, towards downtown, a column of black smoke rose into the rust-colored sky. It had been there for a day. 2 days ago, there had been the sound of heavy fighting. The deep thump of military helicopters, the chatter of machine gun fire, a series of heavy explosions that shook my windows. Now, there was only the smoke. The 7th Infantry Division and their safe zones were a ghost story. The army had lost. The world outside was dead. I turned from the window. The city map was still on the floor. I picked up a paring knife and a small, replicated whetstone and began to sharpen the blade. The rhythmic shing 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 was the only sound. My fortress was secure, my supplies were endless, but staying here was a slow death. The building was a sinking ship, and I was the only one with a lifeboat. It was time to leave. My eyes fell on the map again, on the circled cluster of houses in the suburban valley. The oasis. My gaze drifted back to the window, down to the street 7 floors below. A small group of them were shuffling along the sidewalk. Slow, aimless, just one group, but I knew there were more. In the alleyways, in the darkened storefronts, in the cars, the street was the kill zone. How did a king leave his castle when the world outside was full of monsters? Day 15. The fog came on day 13. It rolled in from the river, thick and yellow-gray, and it did not leave. It carried a smell, something like low tide and spoiled milk. It pressed against my window, blurring the view of the dead street below. The world had become my apartment. The building itself was a corpse. The sounds had changed. The frantic shouting and banging of the first week had given way to something worse. Long periods of quiet broken by a sudden, wet cough from the floor below. A single, short scream from down the hall at night. The sound of something being dragged. The dead remained where they fell. The living were turning on each other for the scraps. I'd heard a fight 2 nights ago over a can of peaches. It ended with a gurgling sound and then a man weeping. The plumbing was gone. The air was heavy with the stench of human waste and decay. It seeped under my door, a constant reminder of the tomb this building was becoming. The infected were inside now. I heard them sometimes, a slow, scraping shuffle on the floor above, a low moan that seemed to vibrate through the concrete. They had gotten to my level. I'd heard a door splinter yesterday afternoon, followed by noises no human should make. I did not care. The chaos outside my door was a different world. Inside, there was only routine. My power had shifted. The draining ache in my gut and the splitting headache that followed a large replication were gone. It was replaced by a cool, sharp clarity. The process was faster, cleaner. I touched my last remaining fire axe, a standard issue one from the hallway emergency case. My mind did not just feel a pull anymore. It felt a click, like a photograph being taken. A perfect blueprint of the object. The weight of the head, the curve of the wooden handle, the precise edge of the blade, was now a permanent fixture in my mind. I could create from that mental image now, without the original. The strain was less on my body, more on my mind. A minor focus, a small exertion of will. Thump! A perfect copy of the axe lay on the carpet. I did it again, and again. I now had 5. The real breakthrough came from apartment 7B. The man who lived there, a quiet accountant, had not made it. I knew because I'd watched him try to run for his car on day 3. He didn't get far. I'd waited 12 days before I took a replicated crowbar to his door. The lock splintered easily. The apartment was stale, untouched. On his bedside table, under a copy of a tax code manual, was a Glock 19. A single magazine, half full, lay beside it. I picked it up. The cold, textured polymer of the grip felt alien in my hand. Heavier than I expected. I touched it, closed my eyes, and let my mind take its picture. The click was sharp, decisive. Every spring, every pin, every groove of the rifling was there. I let go of the original, stood in the middle of his living room, and focused. My hand was empty. I willed it to be full. A faint pressure built behind my eyes. The air in front of my hand seemed to shimmer for a fraction of a second. Then, cold, hard reality. A second Glock, identical to the first, sat in my palm. The weight felt solid, real. It was real. I did it again, then again. In 10 minutes, I had a row of 10 pistols on the dead man's coffee table. I picked up a 9mm round. Click. I focused on the box of ammo he had in his drawer. Not one at a time. I pictured the entire box. The mental effort was greater, a sustained pressure that made my teeth ache. A cardboard box, full of 50 perfect, brass-cased cartridges, materialized on the floor. I spent the next hour creating a small mountain of ammunition. My fortress didn't need stronger walls. It needed teeth. My time here was over. This apartment was a prison, and its walls were closing in. The map was still on my floor, the suburban valleys circled in red. The oasis. That night, before I planned to leave, I decided on a final meal. A farewell to this cage. In the accountant's freezer, tucked behind bags of frozen peas and a block of freezer-burned fish, was a prize. A single, thick-cut ribeye steak, vacuum-sealed. A relic from the old world. I carried it back to my apartment like a trophy. I did not eat it. Not the original. I placed it on my clean counter. I touched the cold, plastic-wrapped meat. Click. A second steak appeared beside it. I put the original in my pack for the journey. The copy was for tonight. My small heating coil, powered by the replicated marine battery, glowed red. I put the frying pan on it. I unwrapped the steak. I had replicated salt and pepper from my shakers. I seasoned the meat with deliberate care. I found a knob of butter in my fridge, the last of the real stuff. A small indulgence. I dropped it into the hot pan. It melted instantly, foaming and sizzling. I laid the steak down. The sound was a thunderclap in the muted world of the apartment building. A loud, aggressive tssshhhhhhhh. It was the sound of life, of heat, of plenty. The smell followed immediately, rich, fatty, the unmistakable aroma of searing beef. It was a smell that did not belong here. It was a violation of the building's new rules of hunger and decay. It filled my small kitchen, my living room. It was too powerful to be contained. I knew it was slipping under the door, rolling down the dark, fetid hallway. A ghost of a forgotten life. I flipped the steak. Another loud sizzle. I basted it with the foaming butter. The scent intensified, a fragrant cloud of prosperity. I heard it then, a sound from outside my door. A soft shuffle of feet on the filthy carpet. A pause. I imagined them out there. Jessica, Chad, the others who remained on this floor. Drawn by the smell like moths to a flame. I imagined their empty stomachs twisting, the saliva filling their mouths. The memory of what food like this tasted like would be a form of torture. I smiled. It was a small, tight movement of my lips. It felt good. The steak was done, medium rare, a perfect crust on the outside, red and juicy within. I had replicated my last bottle of cheap Merlot until I had a case. I poured a glass. I sat at my small table, the same table where I ate my canned hash. But tonight was different. Tonight, I was a king. Outside my door were the starving beggars. I cut a piece of the steak. It was tender. The knife slid through with almost no resistance. The fat melted on my tongue. The wine was acid and fruit, cutting through the richness. It was a symphony. A low moan came from the hallway. A sound of pure agony. It wasn't one of the infected. It was human. A sound of a spirit breaking. I took another slow bite. I chewed deliberately. I could almost feel their eyes on my door, burning with a mixture of hatred and desperate, humiliating need. They knew what I was eating. And they knew they would never taste it again. They knew I had it all, and I had given them dust from a ramen packet. The power was not in the having. It was in their knowing. Chad wouldn't try to break down my door again. The fear I had put in him, that cold pressure from my will, was a stronger barrier than any furniture. He was an animal now, and he had learned which predator was too dangerous to challenge. I finished my meal. I washed my plate and my fork in a basin of clean, replicated water. I packed my gear, a military-style backpack, copied from a picture in a survivalist magazine. It was filled with high-energy food bars, sealed packets of jerky, bottles of purified water. 5 full magazines for my new pistol. A box of loose rounds. The whetstone and the sharpest of my replicated knives. The 5 axes and the crowbar were too heavy. I would leave them. I could make more. I strapped the holstered Glock to my hip. I slid a knife into a sheath on my belt. I put on a pair of replicated work boots and a dark jacket. I looked at myself in the reflection of the dark window. The thin, anxious office worker was gone. A stranger looked back, his eyes cold and empty, his face set. He was ready. I slept for 6 hours. The building was quiet. The next morning, the fog was still there. I drank the last of my coffee. I shouldered my pack. The weight was comforting. I walked to the door. I did not look back. There was nothing here to miss. My hand went to the deadbolts. I listened. Silence. No coughing. No shuffling. Nothing. Click. The first lock disengaged. Click. The second. I turned the knob. The latch retracted with a soft metallic sound that seemed to echo in the hallway. I pulled the door inward. The smell hit me first. A wave of iron and rot, so thick it was like a physical blow. The hallway was not empty. It was full. There were maybe a dozen of them, standing or slumped against the walls. Some wore the tattered remains of pajamas, others the office clothes they had died in. Their skin was pale gray, pulled tight over their bones. Veins stood out like dark purple webbing. Their eyes were clouded, milky white. They were all still, statues in a gallery of plague. Then, the head of the closest one, a woman in a floral bathrobe, swiveled towards the sound of the opening door. A slow, creaking movement. Her jaw hung open, a strand of saliva connecting her chin to her chest. Her milky eyes fixed on me, and in the silence of the dead building, a low, guttural growl rumbled up from her chest. One by one, the other heads began to turn. The guttural sound was a trigger. The air in the hallway vibrated with it. One by one, the clouded, milky eyes turned toward the sliver of light from my open door. They were a gallery of decay, frozen in the moment of their last breath. Now, the gallery was coming to life. I did not step back. I raised the Glock. The weight was solid, an anchor in a world that had come loose from its moorings. The woman in the floral bathrobe took a dragging step forward, her bare feet making a wet, sticking sound on the filthy carpet. My mind did not race. It was a cold, clear space. There was the target. There was the tool. My will, a new muscle I was just learning to flex, pushed outward. A pressure, like the air thickening before a storm, filled the narrow hall. The woman in the bathrobe faltered. Her forward lurch became a momentary, clumsy stagger. It was a fraction of a second. It was an eternity. The first shot was not loud. It was a sharp, contained crack. It kicked in my hand. In the center of the woman's forehead, a small, dark hole appeared. The back of her head did not exist anymore. She fell like a bag of laundry, a heap of fabric and ruined meat. Another one lunged from the side, a man in a stained dress shirt. The pressure of my will hit him. His lunge slowed, his arms flailing as if moving through water. Crack. He fell across the first one. Crack. A third, by the far wall. Crack. A fourth, trying to push past the bodies. It was a rhythm, a piece of work. Identify, exert, fire. Reloading was a smooth, practiced motion. I dropped the empty magazine. The metal clattered on the floor. I slid a full one home. The click of the magazine seating was the most satisfying sound in the world. I had 12 of them. They had a dozen. The math was in my favor. The hallway was a butcher's shop. The smell of iron and cordite burned in my nose, a welcome replacement for the rot. I stepped over the bodies, my replicated work boots leaving clean prints in the grime. I did not look at their faces. They were obstacles that had been removed. The stairwell was my next objective. The elevator was a steel coffin, its doors pried open on a lower floor. I could hear them down there, more of them, drawn by the gunshots. A slow, rising chorus of groans. I went up. The roof was the only way out that didn't involve wading through a tide of the infected. The roof door was chained. I had left the axes. I placed my hand on the steel chain. My mind took its picture. Click. I let go. I held my empty hand over the copy I had formed in my head, focusing. The pressure behind my eyes was a dull ache. A chain, identical to the first, clattered onto the concrete floor. Then bolt cutters, copied from a memory of a hardware store display. The metal squealed as I cut the original chain. I pushed the door open. The city hid me. Day 16 was hot. The sun was a merciless white disk in a hazy sky. A wave of heat washed over me, carrying the stench of 1,000,000 tons of rotting garbage and 10,000 unburied bodies. It was a physical smell, a taste on the back of the tongue. Down below, the street was a junk pile of crashed cars, broken glass, and sprawled figures. Flies rose in shimmering black clouds from every pile of refuse. The world was a failed septic system. I walked to the edge of the roof, my pack a comforting weight. Far below, I saw movement. The living, a small group of 3 people, scurrying from the shadow of one car to another. They moved like mice, all darting glances and frantic sprints. They were hunted. I was not. I scanned the streets, looking for a tool. A blue Ford F-150 sat parked crookedly, its driver's side door ajar, looking almost untouched. It was a quarter-mile away, on a side street. That was my target. Getting down was simple. The fire escape on the back of the building was sturdy. I moved with a steady, unhurried pace. The groans of a few walkers in the alley below were just background noise. A single shot for each. Problem solved. The street was worse up close. The heat cooked the blood on the pavement into a dark, sticky varnish. A car had driven into a storefront. The driver was still inside, slumped over the wheel, his head a black, swollen mess. I reached the F-150. The keys were in the ignition. A small miracle. I tossed my pack on the passenger seat and slid behind the wheel. The cab was an oven. I turned the key. The engine sputtered, tried to catch, then died. I tried again. Nothing. Fuel gauge was on E, of course. In the truck bed, under a greasy tarp, I found what I needed. An empty 5-gallon red plastic gas can. I picked it up, held it. The cheap, molded plastic. The greasy handle. Click. I memorized its form. I set the original on the ground and focused. A second can appeared beside it, then a third, and a fourth. They were all empty. I picked one up again, but this time I pictured it full. Full of gasoline. The mental effort was immense. A sharp spike of pain shot through my temples. The can in my hand grew heavy. I sloshed it. It was full. The smell of gasoline wafted from the nozzle. I spent the next 20 minutes creating 50 gallons of fuel, one 5-gallon can at a time. The headache became a pounding drum against my skull, but I pushed through it. I filled the truck's tank. I also saw a worn-out tire in the bed. I touched it, memorized the tread, the brand name on the sidewall. Click. I created a perfect, brand new copy and threw it in the back. A spare. I found a rusty spark plug and did the same. Tools. Assets. The engine roared to life on the first try. The sound was a declaration of intent. It sliced through the quiet decay of the street. I turned on the AC. It blew hot, stinking air for a moment, then cooled. Replicated bottles of water from my pack were cool against my throat. The noise had drawn attention. I saw them first. 3 men, emerging from a looted storefront across the street. They were thin, wiry. Their eyes were dark and sharp, fixed on the truck. One held a baseball bat with nails driven through it. Another had a long piece of rebar. The third had a kitchen knife. They looked at the truck, then at me. They saw a single man. They saw a working vehicle. They saw an opportunity. They started to cross the street, fanning out. Their steps were confident, predatory. Get out of the truck. The one with the bat shouted. His voice was rough. I did not answer. I didn't even look at him. I looked at the rearview mirror. The engine's noise had drawn other things, too. From the ends of the block, they were coming. The slow, shuffling gait of the infected. The men saw them too. It made them more urgent. They broke into a run, closing the distance. Now, get out. I turned my head and looked at the leader. I pushed with my will. It was not a visible force. It was a change in the world around him. I saw his confident stride break. He stumbled, as if the pavement had suddenly turned to mud. The look in his eyes changed from aggression to confusion, then to a sudden, animal fear. The man with the rebar froze mid-step. The man with the knife stopped dead, his face pale. They felt it, a predator in the food chain far above them, a cold certainty that moving forward was death. I put the truck in drive. I pulled away from the curb, not fast, but with a deliberate, smooth motion. I drove right past them. They stood frozen, paralyzed by a fear they could not understand. I glanced in the mirror again. They were standing in the middle of the street, watching me go. The first of the walkers was only 20 feet away from them. And closing. I didn't watch the outcome. It didn't matter. Driving through the dead city was like a tour of a failed civilization. I had a replicated MP3 player from my old apartment, loaded with music from a different lifetime. The music played through a small copied speaker on the dashboard, a bubble of sound in a dead world. Outside, I saw the things the men on foot saw up close. A woman, cornered in an alleyway, screaming as 3 infected closed in. A man on a rooftop, firing a rifle at the street below until it clicked empty. A child's bicycle, lying on its side on a perfect, green lawn. The suburbs were quieter. The walls of the gated communities offered a brief illusion of safety. I followed the map I had memorized, heading for the hills. The road narrowed, winding up into a small, secluded valley. And there it was, the heights at Redwood Valley. The stone sign was elegant. The black iron fence was 10 feet high. A single road led in through a security gate, now bent and broken. This was it, the high ground, the fortress. I drove through the gate. The community was a collection of a dozen mansions, each one an obscene monument to old-world money. Lawns were overgrown. Porsches and Mercedes sat in driveways, covered in a film of dust. No signs of life. No signs of the dead. I chose the largest one, at the very end of the cul-de-sac, perched on the highest point of the hill. It was a monster of glass and white stone, with a 4-car garage and an infinity pool overlooking the valley. I parked the truck and got out. The air here was cleaner. The front doors were thick glass. I shattered one with the butt of my Glock and stepped inside. The interior was cool and dark. A grand staircase swept up to the second floor. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light coming through the tall windows. It smelled stale, but not of rot. I did a systematic search. The place was clean, abandoned in a hurry. I found the master bedroom, the study. In the study, behind a painting of a sailboat, was a wall safe. I didn't know the combination. I didn't need to. I touched the heavy steel door. Click. I visualized the internal locking mechanism. The tumblers, the bolts. I replicated the entire assembly in the unlocked position in my mind, then focused on making it a reality. A heavy chunk of metal, the lock's inner workings, fell out of the safe door and clattered on the hardwood floor. The door swung open. Inside were bearer bonds, jewelry, a passport. Useless. But at the bottom, rolled up and secured with a rubber band, were blueprints. The architectural plans for the house. I unrolled them on the massive mahogany desk. I scanned the pages. Main floor, second floor, basement level, and then I saw it. A separate page, labeled, Phase 2 Addendum, Shelter. A massive, reinforced concrete structure was detailed beneath the foundation of the main house. It had its own ventilation, its own power conduits, its own deep water well access. A fallout shelter, a tomb fit for a king. I laid my hand on the blueprints, my fingers tracing the lines of my future kingdom. A cold smile touched my lips. I stood there for a long time, the plan spread out before me. From a high window in the study, I could see back towards the city, a gray smudge on the horizon. I picked up a pair of binoculars from the desk. I scanned the distant skyline. I saw smoke. I saw the hospital where I'd once had a checkup. The building was a hive. I could just make out figures on the roof. They were fighting, holding a line against infected trying to get through a doorway. One figure, a woman in what looked like medical scrubs, was not fighting. She was kneeling, working on someone on the ground. Desperate, doomed. I watched for a moment, a detached observer, then lowered the binoculars. Their struggle was not my concern. My concern was here, my new home. That's when I heard it. It wasn't a groan. It wasn't the shuffle of the dead. It came from a different part of the house, down the main hall. A metallic clatter, a can falling on a stone floor. It was followed by a sharp, whispered curse. Shit, be quiet. A different voice answered, just as quiet. I'm sorry, I slipped. The house was not empty. And they were not infected. I drew the Glock from its holster, the movement silent and fluid. My house had tenants. It was time to serve the eviction notice. The sound was a miscalculation. A mistake. My house. My rules. The first rule was silence. I drew the Glock. The movement was a whisper of Kydex against my jeans. I moved out of the study, placing my feet with deliberation on the dark wood floor. The replicated boots were silent. Downstairs, the grand entryway, the sound had come from there. I said be quiet. The whisper was sharp, panicked. It was an accident. The floor's slick. A second voice, younger, apologetic. They were amateurs. I flowed down the sweeping curve of the staircase, staying in the deep shadows against the wall. From my new vantage point, I could see them. 5 of them, clustered near the shattered glass of the front door. They looked like a pack of stray dogs. Thin, dressed in mismatched clothes, faces smudged with dirt. They had 3 heavy bags with them, stuffed with junk. A scavenged lamp, a roll of carpet, useless things. One of them, a lanky man with a greasy ponytail, was trying to pry a small painting from the wall. Another was kicking at the leg of a marble-topped table, trying to break it off. Vandalism for the sake of it. The one who had cursed, a stocky man with a stained t-shirt and a tire iron in his hand, seemed to be the leader. He scanned the cavernous room, his eyes nervous and greedy. Grab what you can. We're out before dark. They hadn't seen me. I was just another shadow in a house full of them. I let my will push outward. Not a full force attack, just a gentle, ambient pressure. The air in the room grew heavy. I watched the leader. He stopped, holding his tire iron tighter. He licked his lips. A fine sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead. Something's not right, he muttered, his voice low. It's just a creepy house, man, said the kid who had slipped. No, it feels watched. I decided the introduction was over. I took the last 3 steps down into the open, the Glock held low and ready at my side. The kid saw me first. His eyes widened, his mouth opened, but no sound came out. One by one, the others turned. 5 pairs of eyes locked onto me. I was one man, they were 5. The math should have been on their side. "The fuck are you?" the leader growled, raising the tire iron. He took a half step forward, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. The others fanned out, one pulling a long kitchen knife, another hefting a cracked baseball bat. I did not answer. I raised the Glock and fired one shot into the high, vaulted ceiling. The sound was a physical blow. It was deafening in the enclosed space, a crack of thunder that ripped through the stale air. Plaster dust rained down. The 5 of them flinched back as one. The kid dropped the painting he was holding. It clattered on the marble floor. In the ringing silence that followed, I focused my will entirely on the leader. It was like a fist closing around his mind. He staggered back, the tire iron falling from his suddenly nerveless fingers. It hit the floor with a loud clang. He clutched his head, his face a mask of confusion and stark terror. He was not afraid of the gun. He was afraid of the feeling. The deep, certain knowledge that he was prey, and I was something that had long forgotten what it was like to be hunted. The others saw their leader crumble. The man with the knife looked from his boss to me, his hand trembling. I shifted my gaze to him. He audibly whimpered and dropped the knife as if it were burning hot. I spoke for the first time. My voice was calm and even, cutting through the tension. "Drop your bags. Get out." They didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled over each other, a panicked herd, leaving their pathetic loot behind. They stumbled out through the broken glass door and disappeared into the overgrown lawn. I watched them run until they were out of sight, down the long, curving driveway. Pests. Exterminated. The house was mine again. The smell was the next thing I dealt with. In the kitchen, they had left a mess of half-eaten, moldy canned goods. A pot on the stove held a scummy, greenish water. The air was thick with the scent of unwashed bodies and stale food. They had lived in a multi-million-dollar mansion and turned its heart into a garbage dump. I spent the rest of the day cleaning. It was a methodical, satisfying process. I touched a pristine sponge I found in a sealed package under a sink. Click. A case of them appeared on the counter. I touched a bottle of industrial strength cleaner. Click. I had a dozen. I worked my way through the house, erasing every trace of their presence. I scrubbed floors, wiped down surfaces. I gathered their trash and burned it in a steel barrel in the backyard. With the house clean, I began the real work. Fortification. Day 20 was ending. The sun was a low, orange smear behind the hills. I went to the 10-foot high iron fence that surrounded the property. It was ornamental, designed to keep out nosy neighbors, not the ravenous dead. The gaps between the bars were wide enough for a man to squeeze through. I placed my hand on a solid iron bar. I felt the cool, rough texture. I mapped its density, its shape, its molecular structure in my mind. Click. I stood back and focused on the space between 2 bars. The headache started, a familiar dull throb. A shimmering, near-transparent outline appeared there, then solidified. A perfect copy of the iron bar, fused seamlessly into the gap. I did it again, and again. It was exhausting work. After every 10 bars, I had to stop, drink water, and fight the wave of nausea that came with the mental strain. My power was stronger now. Before, copying something this dense would have left me gasping after 1 or 2 attempts. Now, it was a manageable drain. I felt a change in the process itself. It was becoming more efficient, as if my mind was learning to read the source code of objects faster, requiring less energy to compile the copy. I spent 3 days on the fence. I sealed every gap. Then I moved on to the next step. I found a roll of razor wire in the maintenance shed of one of the other abandoned mansions. I held it, the cruel sharpness of the barbs, the coiled tension of the steel. Click. I began to replicate it, spool after spool, stringing it along the top of the now impenetrable wall. My hands, protected by copied Kevlar gloves, were steady. The headache was my constant companion, a drumbeat marking the rhythm of my labor. I did not stop until the entire perimeter was a fortress of iron and razors. The single road in, through the main gate, was the only way in or out. A kill box of my own design. On the 4th day, I rested. I sat by the infinity pool, which I had cleaned and refilled with replicated water. I ate a replicated steak, cooked to perfection on a high-end gas grill. I had everything I needed. Security, comfort, resources. The city, a smudge of gray failure on the horizon, felt a world away. But my kingdom had needs. While I could replicate food, water, and ammunition, my knowledge had limits. I had the blueprints for a fallout shelter, but I wasn't an engineer. I could copy medicine, but I wasn't a doctor. A king needs a court. He needs specialists. My thoughts turned back to the hospital I had seen through the binoculars. A desperate, losing battle. There might be survivors, useful survivors. A supply run was in order. Not just for things, but for people. Assets are assets, whether they're made of steel or flesh and blood. I loaded the F-150. Extra fuel cans, boxes of ammunition, a replicated sledgehammer, and bolt cutters. I drove out of my fortress, the heavy gates sliding shut behind me. The closer I got to the city center, the worse it became. The streets were more clogged. The number of walkers increased exponentially. They were no longer isolated figures but shuffling, groaning herds that flowed like a slow-motion river through the canyons of the city. Gunshots echoed intermittently from distant blocks. I saw the hospital from a mile away. It wasn't just a smudge of smoke anymore. It was a pillar of black soot rising into the hazy sky. It was a beacon. As I got closer, the scale of the disaster became clear. The main building was overrun. Every window was broken. The dead milled around the entrance in a thick, impenetrable mass. The fighting had stopped. The battle was over. The hospital had lost, but the chaos had spilled into the surrounding streets. A panicked exodus. I saw overturned cars, scattered luggage, and bodies. The living and the dead were tangled together. I parked the truck in a back alley, 2 blocks away, and went forward on foot, the Glock in my hand, a silenced rifle slung over my back. I moved through the shadows, a ghost in the urban graveyard. My target was a small, private clinic I remembered being across the street from the main hospital. Less populated, a better chance of finding intact medical supplies. That's when I saw her. In a small, dead-end alley between the clinic and a pharmacy, a scene was playing out. A woman in tattered blue medical scrubs was on the ground, her back against a brick wall. Her leg was twisted at a sickening angle, a shard of bone pushing against the fabric of her pants. She was alive, her face pale with pain and fear. Standing over her were 3 men. They were not walkers. They were alive, and their eyes held a predatory gleam that was far more dangerous. One held a pipe, another had a box cutter. They weren't looting for supplies. They were cornering prey. "Look what we got here," the one with the pipe said, his voice a low drawl. A little nurse, all alone. "My leg, please," she gasped, trying to push herself back against the wall. "Help me." "Oh, we'll help you," the man with the box cutter sneered, taking a step closer. He reached down, his grimy hand grabbing for the collar of her scrubs. The woman squeezed her eyes shut. A single tear cut a clean path through the grime on her cheek. I raised the rifle. The clinic was my objective, but this was an opportunity. An injured doctor or nurse, desperate and indebted. A valuable asset. I didn't shout a warning. I didn't announce my presence. I simply adjusted my aim and pulled the trigger. The rifle coughed, a soft phut. The man with the pipe, the one who had spoken first, stiffened. A small, dark hole appeared in the back of his head. He fell forward without a sound, his body hitting the pavement with a wet thud. The other 2 froze, their heads snapping up, eyes wide with shock. They couldn't see me in the shadows of the alley's mouth. They didn't have time to. Phut. The second man, the one with the box cutter, collapsed. The last man stared at his fallen friends, then at the woman on the ground, then into the darkness. Panic finally broke through his greed. He turned to run. I let him take 2 steps before I put a bullet in the back of his knee. He screamed and went down hard, his leg folding beneath him. Silence returned to the alley, broken only by the man's ragged moans of pain. The woman in scrubs stared, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief, first at the bodies, then towards the shadows where I stood. I stepped out of the darkness and into the dim light of the alley. Her eyes met mine. I had come for supplies. It looked like I had found something more. The man on the ground clawed at his shattered knee. He made a wet, gurgling sound. The woman in scrubs, Aris, pressed herself harder against the brick, her gaze darting between me and the twitching bodies. The alley smelled of piss and hot garbage. I walked forward. My boots made no sound on the cracked asphalt. I stopped over the man with the ruined knee. He looked up at me, his face a mess of tears and snot. "Please," he sobbed. "Don't." I did not answer him. I raised the rifle. The barrel was 6 inches from his forehead. He squeezed his eyes shut. Phut. The sound was small. His body went limp. Now the alley was quiet except for the woman's sharp, hitched breathing. I turned to her. Her eyes were wide, fixed on me. She was a resource, a potential asset. Her broken leg was a liability, but a fixable one. Can you walk? My voice was flat in the narrow space. She shook her head, a tiny, jerky movement. A fresh wave of pain washed over her face as she shifted. My leg, it's broken. I think the bone came through. I slung the rifle over my shoulder. I knelt, not beside her, but beside the man with the box cutter. I patted him down. A wallet, a half-empty pack of cigarettes. Useless. I moved to the next one. A set of car keys. I pocketed them. Finally, I approached her. I am going to carry you to my truck, I stated. It is 2 blocks away. If you scream, I will leave you here. Fear and a flicker of something else, calculation, crossed her face. She nodded, biting her lower lip so hard it turned white. I slid one arm under her shoulders and the other under her knees. I lifted. She let out a choked cry as her shattered leg moved. Her head fell against my chest, her teeth clenched. She was light, too light. Bones and desperation. Moving out of the alley was the first risk. The street was clearer than I expected, but the dead were still there. Shambling figures in the distance, drawn by the echo of the man's scream. I moved fast, keeping to the shadows of awnings, the F-150 a metal box of safety in my mind. She was rigid in my arms, her breathing a constant, pained hiss. Every step jostled her leg. I could feel the tremors of her pain through my arms. I adjusted my grip, trying to keep the limb still. The back of my neck prickled. One of them had seen us. It detached from a small group half a block down and started our way. It was faster than the others, its gait a jerky, unstable lope. I did not have a free hand for a weapon. I walked faster. The truck was at the end of the next alley. 20 yards, then 10. The shambler was closing the distance, its jaw working, a low moan starting in its chest. I reached the F-150. I propped her against the side of the truck bed, her face gray. Don't move, I ordered. I drew my Glock. The shambler rounded the corner of the alley. I fired once. The bullet hit it square in the forehead. It dropped like a puppet with its strings cut. I opened the passenger door, half lifted, half shoved her inside, then slammed it shut. I got in the driver's side and started the engine. The roar of the V8 was the best sound I had heard all day. I reversed out of the alley, leaving the 3 bodies and the fresh corpse for the city to reclaim. The drive back to the villa was a map of decay. The further from the city center, the thinner the dead became. The sun was a malevolent eye in the sky, beating down on the asphalt. The temperature had been rising for weeks. It was a physical weight. The air that came through the AC vents was the only thing that felt real. Her name was Iris Thorne. She had been a surgeon, an asset. In the sterile white of the master bathroom, I had her lay on a makeshift bed of towels. I replicated a medical kit I found in the clinic, a pristine case full of scalpels, clamps, and antiseptics. I touched the cool plastic of the case. I felt a change, a new pathway opening in my mind. It was not just the object's form and mass anymore, but a deeper understanding. A file, a blueprint. I focused. I held my hand over the marble floor. In my mind, I pictured the case. Click. A second medical case appeared. Then a third, 10 of them, in a neat row. The headache came, sharper than before, but the result was instant. The process had evolved. I no longer needed the original to touch. I could now store the design. I could mass produce. I turned my attention to the task at hand. This is going to hurt, I said. It was not a warning. It was a statement of fact. She just nodded, her jaw tight. I replicated a syringe and a vial of lidocaine from the kit's blueprint. I administered the local anesthetic. Then I took a replicated scalpel and cut away the fabric of her pants around the wound. The bone was white against the blood and torn muscle. It was a clean, ugly sight. She watched my hands, her clinical gaze overriding her pain. I worked. I cleaned the wound. I set the bone. The sound of it grating back into place was loud in the tiled room. She flinched but made no sound. I replicated a lightweight fiberglass cast, fitting it perfectly to her leg. The entire process was efficient. Cold. When I was done, I stood up. The pantry is stocked. The refrigerator has fresh food. The water from the tap is filtered. This is my house. You are a guest. Your job is to recover and then make yourself useful. Do you understand? She looked from her newly casted leg up to my face. The fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by a hard, analytical exhaustion. I understand, she said. The next few weeks fell into a new routine. The heat wave intensified. The world outside my walls baked. The temperature gauge on the patio read 115 degrees by noon. The asphalt on the driveway softened. The dead that wandered into view were different now. The sun had cooked them. Their skin was dark, leathery, and cracked like old jerky. I watched one through my binoculars as it shambled past the gate. A patrol car from a nearby survivor group drove by. A man fired a pistol out the window at it. The bullets seemed to thump into its torso, barely slowing it down. Hardened targets. I made a mental note. 9mm might not be enough anymore. Inside, it was another world. The replicated diesel generator hummed in the basement, powering the central air. The air was cool, dry, and clean. Aris, now on crutches, had taken over the organization of my supplies. She methodically cataloged the food, categorized the replicated medical supplies, and turned a spare bedroom into a proper infirmary. She was efficient, a good asset. My power grew with practice. I scanned the blueprint of every useful thing I owned. The Glock, the rifle, the generator, a high-end solar panel from the roof of a neighboring mansion. A water purifier. My mind became a library of designs. The drain on my stamina was less, but the mental cost for complex or mass replications increased. It was a deep, consuming exhaustion that left my thoughts feeling slow and thick. One morning, I focused on a single 5.56mm cartridge on the kitchen counter. I had its blueprint memorized. I reached out with my will. Click. An entire ammunition can, filled with 100 perfectly formed cartridges, slammed onto the countertop. The sound made Aris jump from the other room. I felt a wave of dizziness, but it passed quickly. This changed everything. The next logical step was security. The fence was strong, but I was blind. I found a security camera in the gatehouse. It was a simple dome camera, high resolution. I placed my hand on it, let my mind absorb the intricate web of lenses, sensors, and circuit boards. I stored the blueprint. I spent the next 2 days creating and installing them. I now had a network of 20 cameras covering every inch of my perimeter, all feeding back to a bank of monitors I set up in the study. My fortress now had eyes. It was on the third day of watching the monitors that I saw them. A small group of figures, staggering in the shimmering heat haze down the main road. They looked like ghosts, thin, dirty, walking with a slow, defeated gait of people who had given up. There were 5 of them. As they got closer, their features became clear. My stomach muscles tightened. I knew them. Trevor, the loudmouth from 3B who always complained about my music. His girlfriend, Jessica, the one who had called my prepping a joke right before the world ended, her face now gaunt and peeling from the sun. The other 3 were faces from the same apartment building. My old life. They stopped at my gate. They stared through the iron bars at the impossible sight within. Green grass, a clean, sparkling pool, a house that looked untouched by the apocalypse. They looked like desert nomads stumbling upon an oasis. Trevor gripped the bars, his knuckles white. "Alex," he shouted. His voice was a dry croak. "Alex, I know you're in there, you son of a bitch. Open this gate." I did not move. I just watched them on the monitor, a grid of pathetic scenes. Jessica stumbled forward, her eyes locked on the house. "Alex, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "We're dying out here. We just need water. Please, for old time's sake. Old time's sake." I felt a smile touch my lips. It was a cold, hard thing. Aris came and stood behind me, looking at the screens. She said nothing. "You have everything," Trevor screamed, his frustration boiling over. "You're just one guy. You can't hoard all this. It's not right. We were neighbors." He rattled the gate, a useless, frantic gesture. The others joined in, a chorus of pleading and demands. They were flies buzzing outside a window. I leaned back in my leather chair. My gaze drifted to a small control panel on the wall next to the monitors. It was for the estate's irrigation system. I had repaired it last week. I pressed a button labeled, "Front Lawn." Outside, there was a series of clicks, and then a hiss. The sprinkler heads rose from the perfect green grass. Arcs of clean, clear, replicated water fanned out across the lawn. The sound of it was loud in the parched air. Droplets sparkled in the relentless sun. On the monitor, the group outside the gate froze. They stared at the water. They watched it soak into the grass, run in tiny rivulets down the pristine driveway, and evaporate on the hot asphalt just inside the gate, inches from their feet. Not a single drop reached them. Trevor's face contorted with a rage born of pure impotence. He screamed, a wordless sound of fury, and kicked the gate. Jessica just stared, her shoulders slumped. Tears cut clean paths through the grime on her cheeks as she watched the water dance on the lawn, a display of wealth so profound it was like a physical blow. The look on her face wasn't just thirst or desperation. It was the crushing weight of a mistake, the full, soul-crushing realization of what she had thrown away. I took a sip of the ice water Aris had placed on my desk. The screaming and begging went on for another hour before they gave up, slumping into the meager shade of a dead tree across the road. Their noise, their desperation, was a beacon, and something had seen it. On a camera pointed further down the road, I saw movement. A cloud of dust. A vehicle appeared. It was a rusted, lifted pickup truck with mismatched panels and crude iron bars welded over the windows. It parked a quarter-mile down the road, partially hidden by a bend. I zoomed in. 2 men were in the front seat. Another 2 were in the truck bed, cradling rifles. They weren't looking at my gate. They were looking at Trevor's pathetic little group. They were watching the weak, noisy animals that had just announced the presence of an oasis in the desert. They were predators, and the bait had just presented itself. The dust from the pickup truck hung in the air long after it stopped. A quarter-mile down the road, tucked into the curve. 2 men in the cab. 2 in the bed. They were not looking at my house. They were looking at Trevor. At the weak, the noisy. I pushed back from the desk. The leather of the chair groaned. Aris stood behind me, her reflection a pale shape in the dark monitor screen. Her weight was on her good leg. The crutches leaned against the wall. They made a deal, she said. Her voice was a low murmur. I did not need to ask how she knew. I could see it on the screen. I watched one of the men get out of the truck. A big man, shirtless, with a belly that hung over his jeans. He walked with a lazy confidence toward Trevor's group. Trevor, who had been screaming at my gate minutes ago, now looked small. He scrambled to his feet. The big man talked. Trevor listened. Then Trevor pointed. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my gate. Jessica, his girlfriend, nodded beside him, her face a mask of frantic hope. The other survivors from our old apartment building huddled together, watching the exchange. They were selling me for a chance to live another hour. The big man grinned. He slapped Trevor on the shoulder, a gesture that was half camaraderie, half ownership. He turned and walked back to his truck. They'll attack the gate, I said. It was a fact, not a guess. How many? Aris asked. The truck holds 4, maybe more are waiting. I'd guess 20. Amateurs. Desperate. I stood and walked to the reinforced steel door that led to the basement. Come, you can watch the feeds from downstairs. And load magazines. She picked up her crutches and followed. Her movements were slow but steady. In the cool, dry air of the basement, the hum of the generator was a constant, living thing. I had already set up a secondary monitor station here, a fallback position. Aris sat. She pulled a box of replicated 5.56mm rounds toward her and began the rhythmic, mechanical task of pressing bullets into magazines. Click, click, click. The sound was small but precise. I closed my eyes. I did not need a physical object to touch anymore. The blueprints were in my head. A library of things. I called one up. M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun. I had scanned it from a burned-out Humvee on the interstate a month ago. A heavy, beautiful piece of military hardware. I held my hand out over the concrete floor. I focused on the design. The heavy barrel, the receiver group, the spade grips, the charging handle, 1,000 intricate parts, all fitting together. My mind traced every line, every gear, every spring. A familiar pressure built behind my eyes. It was a spreading warmth that turned into a sharp spike of pain, like an ice pick being pushed slowly into my skull. A drop of blood, warm and wet, dripped from my nose onto the floor. A sound started in the air in front of me. A low hum, then a series of sharp, metallic clicks as molecules arranged themselves. The air shimmered. Metal formed from nothing. First the barrel, then the body, then the smaller components, all fusing into a single, solid object. A 50-kilogram block of perfectly replicated steel and engineering. It hit the concrete floor with a heavy, final thud. The headache receded to a dull ache. I wiped the blood from my lip with the back of my hand. Next, the ammunition. The .50 caliber rounds were larger, more complex. I pictured an ammunition can, filled. Click. Another thud, heavier this time. Then another. And another. 5 cans. 500 rounds. The room began to spin. I put a hand against the wall to steady myself. The mental cost was high. Alex, Aris said. She was looking at the monitor. They're moving. I hauled the heavy gun upstairs. Then the ammo cans, one by one. Each trip left me more breathless. The air on the ground floor was warmer. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and blood. I climbed the ladder to the roof access hatch. The heat hit me like a physical blow. The roof tiles were hot enough to cook on. I set up the Browning on its tripod near the front edge of the roof, overlooking the gate. The view was clear, the long, straight road, the manicured lawn, the high, iron gate. I bolted a can of ammunition onto the feeding tray, pulled the charging handle twice. The sound of the heavy bolt sliding home was satisfying. I lay behind it, my eye to the iron sights. Down the road, the truck was coming. It was a monster of rust and welded scrap metal. It picked up speed, its engine a loud, unhealthy roar. Behind it, about 20 figures ran, a disorganized mob armed with pipes, machetes, and a few crude-looking rifles. Trevor and Jessica were not among them. They and their friends were huddled by the side of the road, watching. The price of their water. They're going to ram the gate, I said into the small radio clipped to my shirt. I see it, Aris's voice came back, tinny and calm. No other threats detected on the perimeter. The truck was 100 yards away. 50. The driver was a silhouette behind the barred windshield. I could see the faces of the men in the truck bed, mouths open in a collective war cry. They were going to smash through my front door and feast on the spoils Trevor had promised them. The truck hit the gate. The sound was a deafening shriek of tortured metal. It was not the crash of a breakthrough. It was the solid, unyielding crunch of a heavy object hitting an immovable one. The front of the truck crumpled like a tin can. The engine died with a final, choked gasp. The entire frame buckled. The men in the back were thrown forward into the cab. For a moment, there was only the sound of the truck's radiator hissing. The mob of raiders behind it skidded to a confused halt. They stared at the truck, wedged uselessly into the gate I had reinforced with layers of replicated steel plate. They had expected an easy entry. They did not know what to do next. I pressed the butterfly trigger. The world dissolved into noise. A deafening, continuous backquote thump 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 backquote that was more felt than heard. The entire roof under me vibrated. The big gun bucked against my shoulder. Muzzle flash lit up the twilight. I didn't aim for the men. I aimed for the truck's cab. The .50 caliber rounds hit. They did not punch neat holes. They tore through the thin metal of the door as if it were paper. The windshield disappeared into a spray of glass dust. The man in the driver's seat came apart in a red mist. The man beside him was slammed back, his body shredded. I walked the fire across the truck bed. The welded iron bars offered no protection. The rounds punched through, turning the men cowering there into pulp. Metal screamed as it was ripped apart. The gas tank ruptured, fuel sprayed out, and a stray tracer round ignited it. FWOOM. A fireball engulfed the truck. The heat washed over my face even from the roof. The mob that had been following the truck stared, frozen in horror for a second. Then they broke. They screamed. They dropped their pipes and their pathetic guns and they ran. I let them. I ceased firing. The sudden silence was as loud as the gunfire had been. The only sounds were the crackle of the burning truck and the distant, fading screams of the runners. I took a slow breath. The air smelled of cordite and burning plastic. Below, the scene was one of total destruction. The truck was a burning skeleton. Bodies, or pieces of bodies, lay scattered around it. A few figures were crawling, trying to drag themselves away from the flames. I left the gun on the roof and climbed back down. The house was cool. Aris was standing, leaning on her crutches, looking at me. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. "It's over," I said. "What about the others?" she asked. I walked to the front door. I unlocked it and stepped outside. The heat from the fire was intense. The sprinklers I had used to taunt Trevor were still hissing, the water turning to steam as it hit the hot asphalt near the gate. 5 men were on their knees on the far side of the road, hands on their heads. The survivors of the assault. The big, shirtless man was among them. His face was streaked with soot and terror. I walked toward them, my Glock in my hand. They flinched as I approached. Who's in charge? I asked. My voice was flat. The big man looked up. I was. Listen, man, we didn't know. That guy, the skinny one, he said you were just one guy. He said you were a soft target, hoarding food. You're out of food, I stated. He nodded, sweat dripping from his chin. We haven't eaten in 3 days. We got nothing left. A wave of pressure rolled off me, an invisible weight that made him shrink back. My will focused. He started to tremble. Please, we'll leave. We won't come back. I looked past him, into the darkness. Trevor and Jessica were still there, watching from the shadows of a dead oak tree. They thought they were hidden. They were wrong. I raised the Glock and pointed it at the big man's head. He squeezed his eyes shut. No, wait. The shot was loud in the night. His body fell sideways onto the asphalt. The other 4 men screamed. One of them pissed himself, a dark stain spreading on his pants. Get up, I said. Drop your belts, your boots, your weapons, everything, then walk. Don't look back. They scrambled to obey, fumbling with buckles and laces, throwing everything into a pile. Then they turned and ran, barefoot and terrified, into the darkness. I turned my head and looked directly at the oak tree. I could see their shapes. I saw them flinch as my gaze fell on them. I did not raise my gun. I did not say a word. I just looked at them for a long moment. Then I turned and walked back into my house. I locked the door behind me. Aris was waiting. And them? She asked, nodding toward the front of the house. They made a deal, I said. Let them enjoy it. I went to the monitoring station and watched the screen that showed the front gate. After a few minutes, the 4 disarmed raiders emerged from the darkness. They saw Trevor's group. There was no discussion, no negotiation. They fell upon them like wolves. The camera's microphone was too poor to pick up the sounds clearly, but I could see the struggle. The desperation. I turned off the monitor. The next day, I went back to the roof. The sun was already hot. The burned-out truck was a black scar by my gate. Vultures circled overhead. I spent the morning building a permanent, sandbagged emplacement for the Browning. I replicated more steel plates, more concrete bags. I made a proper fortress gun. My first piece of active, automated defense. As I worked, I thought. The attack had been a test. I had passed, but it was reactive. I had waited for the enemy to come to me. That was a losing strategy in the long run. I needed more than just eyes and walls. I needed hands. I needed soldiers. I remembered a piece of information I picked up from a radio broadcast weeks ago. A National Guard unit cut off and surrounded when the bridge on Route 9 collapsed. They were trapped in a small town about 50 miles north. Desperate, but trained, disciplined. Perhaps, I thought, as I cinched the last sandbag into place, it was time to go recruiting. The rain began 30 miles out from the bridge. It was not a clean rain. The first drops hit the armored windshield of the SUV and left greasy, gray streaks. The air, pulled through the cab's filtration system, carried a faint chemical smell, like burned wires. On the unprotected steel of a wrecked sedan by the road, the drops sizzled, eating at the paint. March, the 3rd month, the world was starting to poison itself. I kept my eyes on the road. The SUV was a new creation. I had taken the frame of a Grand Cherokee and layered it with replicated steel plates, the seams thick and ugly. The windows were slabs of bullet-resistant polycarbonate. The tires were solid rubber composites, copied from a military design manual I found online before everything went dark. On a pintle mount bolted through the roof was an M249 squat automatic weapon, fed by a 200-round drum. It was a metal beast, a rolling bunker for one. For me, the hum of the V8 was a steady presence. The gauges glowed green, fuel, full, temperature, normal. I had copied the engine block, the pistons, the entire transmission, piece by piece, until it was perfect. The fuel in the tank came from a single gallon of gasoline I had siphoned, replicated over and over until I had a reservoir that could power a small army. The radio crackled, static, then Aris's voice, clear from the base 50 miles behind me. Perimeter is secure, Alex. Rain intensity is increasing. How is the vehicle holding? The paint is bubbling, I said. The steel is fine. Any contacts? None. Just the dead. Vultures are staying on the ground. The connection cut out. The distance was too great. I was alone. That was the point. The attack a few days ago taught me a lesson. Walls were not enough. A fortress needs a king, and a king needs a sword that can reach beyond his own walls. The National Guard unit trapped at the collapsed Route 9 bridge. That was the rumor. Soldiers, trained, disciplined, potential assets, or potential threats to be neutralized. I had to see for myself. The sound reached me before the sight. The flat, rapid pop of small arms fire. Sporadic, desperate, it was carried on the wind, thin and sharp against the drumming of the rain. I slowed the SUV, killing the headlights. I pulled off the main road, nosing the vehicle into a stand of dead pines. I cut the engine. The silence that followed was filled with the hiss of the acid rain and the distant gunfire. I switched to the thermal scope mounted on the dash, linked to a camera on the roof. The world turned into a monochrome display of heat. White shapes on a dark gray background. The bridge was a mangled ruin of concrete and twisted rebar, sagging into the churning brown water of the river. On my side of it, there was a cluster of hot signatures. Chaos. One figure, a woman, she was backed up against a wrecked bus. Her white hot shape moved with sharp, efficient motions. Firing a rifle, a short burst, a shift in position, another burst. She was a professional. Surrounding her were other shapes. 4 of them, no, 5, they were not human, they were low to the ground, moving on all fours like animals. They were blindingly hot on the thermal, their metabolism burning at a fever pitch. They moved in quick, darting runs, weaving between derelict cars. Hunters. I had only seen them once before, at a distance. Fast, relentless. Then I saw the others. 3 more human hot signatures. Further back, near a military deuce and a half truck, its engine idling, a plume of hot exhaust ghosting into the rain. They were watching. One of them raised his rifle, and I tracked his aim. He was not aiming at the hunters. He was aiming at the woman. A puff of dust kicked up near her feet. A warning shot, or a shot to keep her pinned. They were using her as bait. They had drawn the pack of hunters and were sacrificing one of their own so the others could get away clean. The 3 men piled into the cab of the truck. Its lights flashed on, cutting through the downpour. They were leaving her to die. The woman saw it. Her movements faltered for a second. That was all the opening the hunters needed. One of them leapt, a white blur of motion, clearing a burned-out car and landing on the bus roof above her. I started the engine. The roar of the V8 shattered the quiet. I did not bother with the road. I flattened the accelerator, and the SUV crashed through the dead pines, branches scraping and snapping against the armored plates. It burst from the tree line onto the open approach to the bridge. The hunters and the soldiers all turned toward the new sound. The hunter on the bus hissed, its head swiveling, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The deuce and a half hesitated, its driver momentarily confused. The woman used the distraction. She dropped her empty rifle and drew a pistol, firing 2 precise shots into the hunter closest to her on the ground. It staggered, but did not fall. I did not slow down. The SUV hit the first hunter at 50 miles an hour. There was a wet, heavy crunch that I felt through the floorboards. The vehicle barely shuddered. The white shape disappeared under the front wheels. I swung the wheel hard, the solid tires gripping the wet asphalt. The rear end of the SUV fishtailed, its steel corner smashing into a second hunter, sending it cartwheeling into the side of a concrete barrier. 2 left. They were fast, scuttling back, trying to circle around me. I slammed on the brakes, the SUV skidding to a halt 20 feet from the woman. I hit the button on the dash that unlocked the passenger door. "Get in," my voice boomed through the external speaker. She did not hesitate. She sprinted, low and fast, yanking the heavy door open and throwing herself inside. She slammed it shut just as a hunter leapt, its claws screeching down the polycarbonate window, leaving deep gouges. It found no purchase and fell to the ground. The woman, the soldier, was breathing heavily, her face pale, streaked with rain and grime. There was a dark, wet patch spreading on the sleeve of her fatigues. "Thanks," she managed to say, her voice tight with pain. I ignored her. My thumb was on the joystick that controlled the roof-mounted gun. I swiveled the M249 toward the hunter that had just attacked. I squeezed the trigger. The noise inside the cab was deafening, a high-speed mechanical shredding sound. BRRRRRRRT. Brass casings rained down on the roof like hail. The hunter was torn apart. The 5.56mm rounds ripped through its flesh, pulverizing bone and tissue, stitching a line of impacts across its torso until it was just a heap of twitching meat. The other remaining hunter, seeing this, chose survival. It turned and fled, a pale streak disappearing into the gloom. The Deuce and a Half was moving now, its gears grinding as it lumbered away, heading south, back the way I had come. They were running. The soldier in my passenger seat watched them go. A look of complete betrayal hardened her face. They left me. Yes, I said. I put the SUV in gear. Don't let them, she started. I was already accelerating. The chase was short. The military truck was heavy and slow. My modified SUV was powerful and nimble. I closed the distance in less than a minute. They knew I was coming. The truck swerved, trying to block the road. I simply drove onto the soft shoulder, mud and gravel spraying from my wheels, and pulled alongside them. I could see the three men in the cab. The driver, a man with a thick neck and a panicked expression. The one in the middle, yelling. The one on the passenger side was trying to aim his rifle out the window, but the bouncing of the truck made it impossible. I did not bother with the gun. I reached out with my other ability, the one that had grown alongside the power to create. I focused on the driver. On his mind, I pushed. It was not a voice. It was a weight, a cold, heavy pressure that settled on his shoulders, seeped into his skull. His eyes went wide, his hands started to shake on the steering wheel. A film of sweat appeared on his forehead. Fear, pure, unreasoning fear. I was not suggesting it. I was injecting it directly into his brainstem. He started to hyperventilate. The truck began to drift across the road. I keyed the loudspeaker again. My voice cut through the rain, calm and clear. You left your post. You abandoned a comrade. Liabilities. The man in the middle screamed something I couldn't hear. The man with the rifle finally got it pointed at me and fired a wild burst. The bullet sparked harmlessly against the armored glass of my window, loud cracks that didn't even leave a scratch. I picked up the Glock 17 lying on the center console. I had copied it 100 times over. I took my left hand off the wheel, lined up the shot, and fired once through my open window. The shot was loud. The rear tire of the Deuce and a Half exploded. The truck veered violently. The panicked driver overcorrected. The massive vehicle slid sideways on the wet road, its momentum carrying it into a shallow ditch. It tilted, hung there for a long second, and then crashed onto its side with a groan of protesting metal. I did not stop. I did not even slow down. I drove past the wreck. In my rearview monitor, I could see the three men climbing out of the crushed cab, dazed and disoriented. And in the distance, behind them, I saw another heat signature emerge from the woods. Then another. The fleeing hunter had found friends. Or its pack had found it. The soldier beside me was silent. She watched the screen, watched as the white shapes began to converge on the wreck. She did not say a word. She just watched until I turned the monitor off. We drove in silence for miles. The rain lessened, then stopped. She finally broke the quiet. Name's Zhao, Leah Zhao, Sergeant. Alex, I said. She looked at the bloody tear in her sleeve. I need a medic. I have one, I said. You're a soldier. What was your specialty? Small unit tactics. Reconnaissance. She leaned her head back against the seat, her eyes closing. You're not military. It wasn't a question. No. What are you? I glanced at her, at the disciplined set of her jaw, even in exhaustion and pain. At the competence I had witnessed. She was an asset. I'm the man who just paid your comrade's debt. When we arrived back at the base, the high steel gate slid open without a sound. The automated sprinklers came on, washing the acidic residue from the SUV's armor. Inside the walls, the air was clean. The lights from the main house were warm and steady. Aris was waiting at the door to the sublevel entrance. She took one look at Zhao's arm, her face calm. Bring her down. The infirmary is prepped. While Aris cleaned and stitched Zhao's wound, a deep gash, but the bullet had just grazed her, I brought her food. A plate of replicated steak, potatoes, and a bottle of clean water. Zhao sat on the edge of the medical cot, watching Aris's efficient movements, then staring at the plate. She ate like a starving wolf, but her eyes kept scanning the room. The clean, painted concrete walls. The steady hum of the air circulation. The bright, flicker-free lights. She was taking it all in. Assessing. Later, after Aris had given her something for the pain and she was settled in one of the guest rooms, Zhao found me in the command center. I was cleaning the M249 on a workbench. She had a tablet in her hand, one of the base's units Aris had given her. A map was displayed on the screen. Your defenses are strong, she said, her voice steady now. But they're static. Your cameras have blind spots here and here. Your machine gun nests have overlapping fields of fire, but they could be suppressed from that ridge if an enemy had mortars. She was right. I stopped my work and looked at her. I can fix that, she said. I can design patrol routes, kill zones, ambush protocols. I can train your people. I don't have people, I said. I have Aris, the doctor. You have me now, she stated, her gaze unwavering. It was a declaration of allegiance. She pointed a finger at a location on the map, a few miles from the university campus. And I know where we can find more than just people. I looked at the screen. It was a commercial research park, a hub for a dozen different tech companies before the fall. What's there? A DARPA contractor, Zhao said. Gen Tech Robotics. They worked on advanced prosthetics, combat exoskeletons, drone AI. Military-grade tech, things that could make this place untouchable. Then why didn't your unit go there? I asked. A shadow crossed her face. The first sign of fear I had seen in her. We were ordered to scout it. But we never got close. The locals, the other survivors, they had stories. Said the place was a tomb. Said something got loose from the labs when the power failed. Something they built. It's not dead. It's not alive. It just patrols. She looked up from the map, her eyes meeting mine. They said it hunts by sound. The air in the science building was thick. It tasted of damp concrete and something else. Something floral and wrong, like flowers rotting in vinegar. Droplets of acid rain, carried in on our gear, hissed on the linoleum floor, leaving small, pitted scars. We moved down the main corridor of the Sterling Hall of Science. University of Westbrook. According to Zhao's intel, a subsidiary of Gen Tech Robotics had a research grant and a dedicated lab on the third floor. Zhao moved ahead of me, her rifle held low and ready. Her steps were silent, mine were not. The heavy-duty boots I'd copied crunched softly on fallen plaster. Every sound was a betrayal. We passed classrooms with shattered doors. Skeletons in lab coats were slumped over desks, picked clean by time and scavengers. There were no dead walkers here. That was the first thing that was wrong. Usually, you find them everywhere. Piled in corners. Trapped in rooms. Here, there was nothing but bones. I held up a hand. Zhao froze. On the wall ahead, a thick, green vine snaked out from a ventilation duct. It was unnaturally vibrant, a deep forest green that seemed to suck the light out of the hallway. Where it touched the metal frame of a doorway, the steel was corroded, flaking away in rust-colored scales. A dark, oily fluid seeped from the points of contact. Project Chimera, Zhao whispered, her voice a dry rasp in my earpiece. That's what the files called the rumor. Bioengineering, rapid growth, territorially aggressive. Acid, I said. It was not a question. The smell was stronger now. I looked at the floor beneath the vine. The linoleum was eaten away, exposing the concrete subfloor, which was also pitted and dark. We gave it a wide berth, pressing ourselves against the opposite wall. My hand rested on the Glock holstered on my thigh. We continued up the stairwell. The growth was more extensive on the second floor. Vines, thick as my arm, covered entire sections of the wall, pulsing with a slow, almost imperceptible rhythm. They had crushed doors, shattered windows. The air was hazy with the acidic vapor they released. My suit's filters were working overtime. I felt a slight tingling on the exposed skin of my neck. The third floor was the heart of it. The vines originated from a single point, the double doors of Lab 3B. Gen Tech's lab. They were woven into a dense, thorny barrier, blocking the entrance completely. A thick, clear slime coated everything, catching the light from my shoulder-mounted lamp. No way through, Zhao stated. She tapped the vine barrier with the barrel of her rifle. It recoiled slightly, like a touched muscle, and a fresh wave of acidic scent washed over us. There's another way, I said, pointing to the architectural plans on my tablet. Maintenance corridor, runs behind the main labs. We found the access door at the far end of the hall, hidden behind a tipped-over vending machine. I put my shoulder into it. The lock, weakened by corrosion, gave way with a sharp crack. The space inside was narrow, filled with pipes and conduit. It was also filled with vines. Smaller tendrils, like questing fingers, covered the floor and walls. We had to step carefully, placing our feet on the exposed sections of metal grating. The air was hot and wet. A scraping sound came from ahead. We stopped. I killed my light. Zhao did the same. We were in complete darkness. The only sound was the drip. Drip. Drip of slime hitting the floor and the low hum of my suit's air filter. Then the scraping came again. Metal on metal. Close. I raised my hand, palm flat. The pressure. I didn't push it out. I layered it around myself, a buffer of cold focus that sharpened my hearing, slowed my breathing. I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my boots. Something was moving toward us. It was small. A single red light appeared in the darkness, about 50 feet away. It bobbed and weaved. It was low to the ground. It was not alive. It looked like a camera. The scraping got faster. It was coming right for us. Contact, Zhao breathed. I flicked my light back on. The beam caught it. It was a metal spider. About the size of a dinner plate, with 6 spindly legs and a domed chassis. A camera lens glowed red in its center. It was a custom-built machine, plates of scrap metal bolted onto a servo-driven frame. It stopped, its lens fixed on us. Then the walls moved. The small tendrils around us surged. They were fast. One wrapped around my ankle, its grip surprisingly strong. I felt a sharp, burning sensation as the acid started to eat through the fabric of my pants. I grunted, stamping my foot, but it held tight. Another vine snaked around Zhao's rifle, pulling it down. She cursed, planting her feet and heaving back. The little robot acted. A nozzle extended from its chassis. It sprayed a fine, white mist over the vines near it. The tendrils hissed, smoke rising from their green skin, and recoiled violently, pulling back into the walls. The robot turned and sprayed the vine on my leg. The burning stopped. The vine shriveled, turning black and brittle before falling away. The robot's red light blinked twice. Then it turned and scuttled away, back down the dark corridor. It stopped after 20 feet, turned back, and blinked again. An invitation. What the hell was that? Zhao asked, prying the dead vine from her rifle. Help, I said. Let's go. We followed the spider bot. It led us through the maze of maintenance tunnels, occasionally pausing to spray any vines that got too close. It stopped at a heavy steel door, clearly reinforced from the inside. The robot tapped the door 3 times with one of its metal legs. A slot slid open at eye level. A pair of eyes looked out. They were young, but shadowed with exhaustion. Who are you? A woman's voice asked. It was sharp, demanding. We're survivors, I said, my voice flat. Your machine saved us. It wasn't saving you. It was protecting its territory, she snapped back. I saw you on the external cameras. Military gear. What do you want? Technology, I said. From the Gen Tech lab. We'll take what we need and leave. A dry laugh came from the other side of the door. Good luck. Chimera has the whole place sealed. Nothing gets in or out. Now leave before you draw more of them. The slot started to slide shut. I held up my hand, showing her the tablet with the building schematics. There's a gas main for the lab's Bunsen burners running through this service corridor. An explosive charge here would compromise the entire floor. We don't want to do that. There was a long pause. The eyes in the slot stared at me, assessing. I did not blink. I was not asking. You're bluffing, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Try me, I said. My thumb rested on the detonator switch in my pocket. It wasn't connected to anything, but she didn't know that. I let a sliver of the pressure leak out, not enough to cause panic, just enough to create a cold seed of doubt in her mind. The silence stretched. I could hear her breathing. Finally, the sound of multiple bolts being drawn back. The heavy door scraped open. The woman standing there was maybe 21, 22. She was thin, swimming in a stained university sweatshirt. Her hair was a messy knot, and her face was smudged with grease. She held a weapon that was part nailgun, part taser, all scrap. Her eyes were fiercely intelligent. She was the one who had survived. The genius. Maya Dean, she said, not offering a hand. This is my workshop. You touch anything, my sentries will put you down. She led us into her sanctuary. It was the lab's main control room, transformed. Barricades of old servers and desks blocked the main entrance. Wires ran everywhere, powering a network of jury-rigged devices. Workbenches were littered with circuit boards, tools, and half-finished robots. It was the nest of a brilliant, desperate creature. In the center of the room, a bank of monitors showed grainy camera feeds of the hallways outside. You built all this? Zhao asked, her voice holding a note of professional respect. Had to, Maya said, her eyes constantly scanning the monitors. The walkers were easy. Then the vines started growing. They're drawn to heat and electrical signals. My first few sentries got eaten. She pointed to a larger drone on a charging station. It looked like a miniature tank, armed with a circular saw. Its armor was pitted with acid scars. That's Spike. He's the last of the big ones. The sprayers, she nodded to the spider bot, only deter them. Spike could cut through them, clear a path. But she trailed off, her shoulders slumping. The bravado fell away, revealing the bone-deep weariness beneath. His main logic board is failing. I need a G78B processing chip. Military grade, obsolete but robust. There was a box of them in the main lab. The Vines got there first. I have one left. She picked up a small, black square of ceramic and silicon from the workbench. She held it like it was the last drop of water in a desert. I can use it to fix Spike, maybe try to clear a path out of here. But if it fails, if I short it, that's it. Game over. I looked at the chip. I looked at the incredible, desperate ingenuity around me. This was not a liability. This was a diamond. Let me see it, I said. She hesitated, clutching it tighter. Why? I'm a collector, I said simply, stepping forward. I held out my hand. Zhao shifted her weight, ready for a fight, but I ignored her. My focus was on Maya, on the calculated risk. She stared at my hand, then at my face. She saw nothing there, no tricks, no deception, just a blank slate. After a long moment, she placed the chip in my palm. It was cool to the touch. I felt the intricate pathways inside it, a tiny, complex city of logic. I closed my hand around it. My power flooded into it. It was like tracing a blueprint with my mind. I felt the drain on my stamina, a familiar ache. I stored the pattern. Then I reached into an empty pouch on my belt. I focused, replicated the pattern, and again, and again. The physical toll was minimal for something so small. I opened my hand and let a cascade of identical black chips fall onto the workbench. They made a soft clattering sound. 10, 20, 30 of them. A small pile of impossibility. Maya Dean made a sound. A small, choked gasp. She stared at the pile of chips. Her face, which had been a mask of cynical defiance, crumbled. Her eyes were wide, her mouth slightly open. She reached out a trembling hand and picked one up, turning it over and over. She looked from the chip in her hand to the pile on the table, then to me. Her expression was one of complete, shattering disbelief. The look of a devout believer witnessing a miracle. The power, she whispered, looking at the charging station for her drone, which was flickering. Even with this, I'm running on a daisy chain of car batteries. I have maybe 3 days of power left. I walked over to a small, portable diesel generator in the corner of the room, marked as a backup for the lab servers. It was out of fuel, useless to her. I placed my hand on its engine block. I had memorized this design weeks ago. I focused, pulling on the blueprint in my mind. This was a larger drain. I felt a wave of dizziness, a cold sweat on my brow. My power surged. Next to the old generator, a new one shimmered into existence. A perfect copy, clean, unscratched. I placed my hand on the fuel tank. I copied the gallon of diesel I kept in reserve. The tank filled. I pressed the ignition. The generator sputtered to life with a loud roar, its lights glowing steadily. The clean, stable noise washed over the quiet hum of the failing batteries. Maya stared at the generator, then back at me. The last of her defenses washed away, replaced by a frantic, blazing light in her eyes. It was the look of a creator who had just been handed the universe. Anything, she said, her voice shaking with a mix of awe and furious energy. I can build you anything. She worked like a woman possessed. With an unlimited supply of chips and stable power, she didn't just repair Spike. She upgraded him, refitting him with 2 more saw arms and reinforced armor I replicated for her. She didn't have to scavenge. She just had to ask. I need titanium plating. I gave her a stack. I need military spec wiring. I provided a spool. We returned to the base with a new member and the entire contents of Gentech's server bank, copied onto a dozen replicated hard drives. The core of my future was complete. Aris, the medic and manager. Zhao, the sword. And now Maya, the forge. That evening, I stood in the command center. On one screen, Zhao was running tactical simulations using Maya's university-wide camera network. On another, Maya herself was already drafting plans for a massive, multi-level hydroponics and aquaponics system to be built in the nuclear bunker. Food, water, self-sufficiency. Phase 2 was now underway. A new alert popped up on my main monitor. An automated radio scanner had picked something up. It was a repeating broadcast, a clear, powerful signal originating from the old Fort Deacon military base 50 miles to the south. A man's voice, stern and official, cut through the static. By order of the Provisional Regional Authority, All unaffiliated survivor enclaves are required to register their location, numbers, and resource status. A patrol will be dispatched to your location to assess and integrate. Cooperation is mandatory. This is for the common good. Fort Deacon is in control. I watched the signal strength indicator. They were strong, organized, and they were looking for people like me. Maya's voice came over the intercom, buzzing with excitement. Alex, the hydroponics system is viable. Totally enclosed, fully automated. But to kickstart the nutrient cycle, I'll need a massive initial volume of purified water and a few key mineral catalysts. The base reservoir won't be enough. She paused, and I could hear her tapping on a keyboard. According to city records, the municipal water treatment plant at Clear Creek has vats of the exact mineral slurry we need. It's a huge facility. I looked at the map. I knew the place. A sprawling complex of tanks and pipes. Dangerous. But now, it was also a treasure trove. Get Zhao, I said into the comms. We're going on a trip. The wind made a sound against the steel shutters. A low moan that vibrated through the concrete walls. On the command center screens, the world was white. Snow fell in thick, wet sheets, burying the dead landscape. The perimeter camera on the north fence was already half covered. I watched the temperature reading in the corner of the monitor. 18 degrees Fahrenheit, and dropping. The air inside the bunker was 72 degrees. I could feel the clean, recycled warmth on my face. A low hum came from the ventilation system, the sound of life. I took a sip of coffee. The beans were South-chepped from a small sample I'd found in a gourmet shop months ago. The taste was rich, real. A soft chime came from the intercom. Sarah's voice. Alex, it's ready. I walked from the command center down the sterile, brightly lit corridor toward the main living area. The bunker, once a concrete shell, was now home. Wires ran in neat bundles along the ceiling, feeding power to recessed lights, data ports, and the climate control system. My power had built this. My will. The living area was a large, open-plan room we had furnished with South-chepped copies of high-end furniture. In the center of the room, a large round table sat under a warm spotlight. Steam rose from a bubbling pot in the middle of it. The air smelled of beef broth, star anise, and chili. Hot pot. Sarah was arranging freshly cut Napa cabbage on a platter. The greens were a vibrant, impossible color against the sterile white of the plate. They had been harvested from the new hydroponics bay less than an hour ago. Zhao was already at the table, polishing her sidearm with a piece of cloth, the parts laid out neatly beside her. Maya sat across from her, a tablet in her lap, her fingers flying across the screen as she fine-tuned the atmospheric sensors for the new grow rooms. This was my inner circle. My family, the architects of our small, perfect world. Looks good, I said. Sarah smiled. First harvest. Maya says the nutrient levels are perfect. The system is 99.8% efficient, Maya said without looking up from her screen. Give me another week and I'll get it to 100. We can grow anything. Strawberries, tomatoes, anything. I sat down. Zhao finished reassembling her pistol with a series of satisfying clicks and set it aside. I picked up a thin slice of marbled beef with my chopsticks and dipped it into the boiling broth. The contrast was everything. Outside, the world was freezing to death. Inside, we were eating like kings. The memory of stale crackers and canned beans was a ghost from another life. We ate. The sound was of quiet enjoyment. The clink of utensils against porcelain. The bubbling of the broth. Zhao told a dry story about a training exercise in Alaska that had gone wrong. Maya argued with her about the thermal dynamics of their standard-issue cold weather gear. Sarah refilled the pot with more broth. For an hour, the apocalypse did not exist. Then a red light flashed on the wall-mounted status board. Proximity alert. Zone 4. The main gate. Everyone stopped. Zhao's hand was already on her pistol. Maya's tablet now showed a schematic of the outer perimeter. Sarah looked at me, her face calm. I pushed my chair back and walked to the command center. They followed. On the screen, camera 4 showed a group of figures. 6 of them. They were huddled together against the reinforced steel gate, barely visible through the swirling snow. They looked like wraiths, dark shapes caked in white. I flicked a switch, activating the external microphone array. Their voices, thin and distorted by the wind, filled the room. Light. I saw light, one of them was saying, a man's voice, chattering with cold. And smoke, another voice said. A woman's. This one was stronger, clearer. She was the one in charge. They have a fire. They have power. They stood there for a few moments, as if gathering courage. Then the woman stepped forward, right up to the camera mounted on the gatepost. Her face was gaunt, her lips blue. Ice crystals clung to her eyebrows. But her eyes burned with a fervent light. "Hello," she shouted over the wind. "We know you're in there. We are survivors. We need shelter." Zhao moved to stand beside me. 6 of them, lightly armed, 1 rifle, maybe a couple of handguns. "They're not a threat. They're a drain," I said. The woman on the screen, seeing no response, tried again. Her voice took on a different tone now. Not pleading, but demanding. "You have a responsibility. You have warmth, you have food. It is your moral duty to share with those who have nothing. There are good people out here. We are not raiders." I watched her, my face impassive. I'd seen her type before the world ended. Always talking about the greater good, always with their hands in someone else's pocket. I pressed the transmit button for the external loudspeaker. My voice boomed out into the storm, sharp and clear. "Responsibility?" The group flinched at the sudden sound. The woman looked up, startled. "Yes, a responsibility to your fellow human beings." "Says who?" I asked. The question hung in the frozen air. She seemed confused. "Says who? Decency says so. Humanity says so. It's the right thing to do." "Says you," I stated. It was not a question. I switched off the microphone. Her voice was cut off. We watched them on the screen in silence. The woman started shouting again, her face contorting with rage. She pointed at the camera, at the walls. Another man beside her started kicking at the gate, a useless, pathetic gesture. They looked like angry children throwing a tantrum outside a locked candy store. "They'll freeze out there," Sarah said softly. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an observation. "That's their choice," I replied, turning away from the screen. "Let's finish dinner." We went back to the table. The mood was unbroken. The food was still hot. The conversation picked up where it left off. Outside, 6 people were slowly dying in a blizzard. Inside, we passed the fresh spinach around. Later, after the plates were cleared, Maya pulled me aside to the workshop adjacent to the command center. The large room smelled of solder and ozone. In the center, mounted on a heavy steel tripod, was her new project. It was a machine of brutal efficiency. A modified M240 machine gun, encased in a weatherproof, servo-driven housing. A thick belt of 7.62 mm ammunition, out-checked from a single round, fed into its side from a large, sealed container. Wires snaked from its base to a control console. "Sentry Turret Alpha," Maya announced, patting its steel flank. "Fully automated, it links to the camera network and the thermal sensors. I've programmed friend or foe recognition based on the RFID tags we all carry. Anything else that gets within 50 yards of the wall, it can engage." She sat at the console and her fingers danced across the keyboard. On the screen, a targeting reticle appeared over the live feed from the main gate. The turret on its stand swiveled with a low, powerful hum, perfectly tracking the movements of her mouse. "I can control it manually from here," she said, "or set it to auto-target. It can lay down a field of fire so dense nothing hostile could survive crossing the kill zone." I placed a hand on the cool metal casing of the turret. This was real security, not a high wall or a strong gate. It was the ability to project overwhelming, lethal force without risk. Chepping the components had drained me for a full day, but it was worth it. "Make 3 more," I said. 1 for each corner of the compound. A predatory grin spread across Maya's face. "With pleasure." Before heading to my quarters, I took one last look at the command center monitors. The group outside was still there. They had erected a crude shelter against the base of the wall, a tattered tarp that bucked and snapped in the wind. The fire they must have had was long dead. They were just dark, cold lumps on the thermal imaging screen. All except 2. I zoomed in with a high-definition camera. It was the woman, Jessica, and a tall, thin man. They were standing away from the others, near a section of the wall obscured from the main gate. The man pulled something from a bag. It was a grappling hook, crudely welded together from rebar. Jessica was pointing up, at the top of the 20-foot concrete wall. At the rows of out-chepped razor wire coiled at the top. They were talking, arguing. The man gestured at the wall, then back at their frozen companions. Jessica shook her head, her movements sharp and angry. She pointed at the main house, at the single lighted window of the command center. "They thought I was alone. One person, hoarding a fortune. They thought they could get over the wall, take the house, and claim their rightful share. The arrogance was breathtaking. The man finally nodded. He began to swing the grappling hook. I leaned forward in my chair. My hand rested on the console Maya had just shown me. My finger hovered over the mouse that now controlled the sentry turret Alpha. The targeting reticle was a small, green cross. I moved it, slowly, until it rested squarely on the woman's chest. I watched her, a predator observing its ignorant prey. The blizzard howled on the screen. The turret hummed, waiting for a command. The green crosshair was a steady, patient thing. It did not waver with the wind that shook the camera housing. It remained fixed on the center of the woman's chest. Jessica, her breath plumed in the frigid air, each exhalation a small, fading ghost. The man beside her grunted, his arms straining as he swung the grappling hook. The crude metal shape spun in a slow, clumsy circle against the backdrop of swirling white. My finger rested on the mouse. It felt cool and smooth. On the console, Maya had programmed the fire control interface with stark simplicity. A red button for automatic engagement. A gray button for manual override. I was in manual. The hum of the turret's servo motors was a low vibration I could feel through the floor, a quiet promise of violence. Zhao stood beside my left shoulder. Her reflection was a pale shape on the dark screen. She didn't speak, she watched. Maya was at her own station, her fingers hovering over a keyboard that controlled the compound's power grid. Her screen showed a web of circuits and power relays, all green. All nominal. The hook sailed upwards. It was a poor throw. It clattered against the concrete face of the wall, 10 feet below the top, and fell back. The man cursed, a sound swallowed by the storm. He tried again. This time, the arc was higher. The hook scraped over the top edge, its metal teeth catching in the coils of razor wire I had chopped last month. He gave the rope a sharp tug. It held. Positions, I said. My voice was low. It didn't need to be loud in the command center. Zhao gave a single, sharp nod and her reflection vanished from the screen. A moment later, a small green icon labeled Zhao appeared on the tactical map of the compound, positioned at the armored door leading outside. Maya's fingers tapped once on her keyboard. A single word appeared on her screen, ready. Outside, the man gestured for Jessica to go first. She hesitated. She looked up at the wall, then at the pathetic huddle of her companions freezing against the gate. Her face, even through the grainy night vision feed, was set with determination. She believed what she was doing was necessary. Justified. She placed a boot on the wall and began to climb. I watched her progress. Her movements were slow, labored by the cold and her heavy clothing. The rope swayed. The man below braced himself, a dark shape against the snow. 1 foot over the other. Hand over hand. She was 10 feet up. 15. Her hand reached the top of the wall. She paused, pulling a pair of wire cutters from her belt. I let her cut the first strand of razor wire. The snap was inaudible through the howling wind, but I saw the wire spring apart on the screen. She was committed now. She pulled herself up, her torso clearing the top of the wall. She was inside. I clicked the mouse. The world outside the bunker erupted in light. 4 massive LED floodlights, chopped from stadium fixtures and mounted on the corners of the main house, blasted away the night. They turned the blizzard into a furious, glittering chaos and the ground into a flat, shadowless white. Jessica was caught in the glare, a deer frozen on a highway. She cried out, shielding her eyes, her body a perfect silhouette. I pressed the transmit key for the external loudspeakers. Territory violated. My voice boomed from every corner of the compound wall, not just loud, but heavy. I pushed a sliver of my will through the speakers, the raw pressure of my mind woven into the sound waves. It wasn't an attack, it was an announcement of presence. The sound of a predator clearing its throat. Trespassers will be shot, Jessica screamed. It was a raw, high-pitched sound of pure panic. She lost her footing, scrambling backward, away from the perceived threat inside the compound. Her feet tangled in the razor wire. She fell from the top of the wall. She didn't fall onto the soft snow outside. She fell onto the concrete walkway inside. I heard a wet, solid crack through the external microphone, even over the storm. The man on the rope let go, startled by the lights and sound, and tumbled backward into a snowdrift. I moved the green crosshair. It slid from where Jessica had been and settled on the ground a foot in front of the man struggling to his feet. I clicked the gray button. The sentry turret Alpha answered. The sound was not a bang. It was a deafening, mechanical roar. A burst of 3 rounds. Crack, crack, crack. The 7.62mm tracers, burning bright red, tore through the air and slammed into the frozen earth. They didn't hit him. They stitched a line in the snow at his feet, kicking up chunks of ice and dirt that peppered his legs. He shrieked, a noise that was half fear, half pain, and threw himself flat on the ground, covering his head with his hands. Down at the main gate, the other four were on their feet, staring into the blinding light, confused and terrified. I gave the turret another burst, this time sending a line of tracers over their heads and into the darkness beyond. They dropped to their knees as one. The smell of hot metal and cordite would be thick in the air. A dark stain spread on the snow around the woman who had been so certain of her moral duty. Status, I said. Intruder 1, female, top of the wall, neutralized. Looks like a broken leg, Maya reported, her eyes flicking across a biosensor feed. Intruder 2, male, outside the wall, prone. The rest are at the main gate, compliant. Zhao, I said into the intercom. Bring out the dogs. Copy, her voice replied, crisp and clear. The armored door on the side of the main house hissed open. Zhao emerged, clad in black tactical gear, a South-checked assault rifle held at a low ready. She was flanked by two machines. They were Maya's dogs. Four-legged robots, about the size of a large German shepherd, built from steel and composite plating. They had no heads, only a cluster of optical sensors that glowed a soft blue. They moved with an unnervingly silent, fluid grace across the snow. They were not armed with lethal weapons. One was fitted with a high-pressure hose. The other with a capture net launcher. They were for crowd control, for handling livestock. Zhao and her mechanical escort rounded the corner. The man on the ground saw them and started to scuttle backward like a crab, his mouth open in a silent scream. The four at the gate just stared, their minds unable to process the sight. I watched on the monitor as Zhao directed one of her dogs to cuff the man's hands behind his back with a zip tie. She then approached the gate. She didn't shout. Her voice was calm, amplified slightly by her helmet's comms. On your feet, hands on your head, walk towards me, slowly. They obeyed. They moved like sleepwalkers, their eyes wide with shock. Jessica was still on the ground inside the wall, moaning, clutching her leg. The bone was sticking out of her pants at a sharp angle. It was a clean, ugly break. The show was over. For the next week, the blizzard raged, and the prisoners worked. I did not kill them. Death was a release. I wanted them to understand. After Sarah set Jessica's leg in a crude splint, I put them to work. Their job was simple. Clear the snow from the perimeter walkway and shovel the bodies of the frozen zombies that had been piling up against the outer fence into a pit. The work was hard, the cold was relentless. Their tools were basic shovels and wheelbarrows. They were watched at all times by the sentry turret and one of Maya's robotic dogs, which would follow them with its silent, blue-eyed gaze. Their food was a calculated insult. Each day, they received one South-checked military MRE and a canteen of clean water. It was enough to keep them alive, to fuel their labor. But they could smell the scent of roasting meat and baking bread drifting from the main house. They could see the lights on inside, a constant reminder of the warmth and comfort they had tried to steal. I watched them one afternoon from the command center. Their faces were gray with fatigue and frostbite. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a dull, hollow look. The man who had swung the grappling hook now struggled to lift a frozen corpse, his back bowed. The woman who had pissed herself now worked without a word, her eyes fixed on the ground. They were broken. Their righteous crusade had ended with shoveling shit in a snowstorm for a slice of bread. This was a lesson more profound than any bullet could teach. On the seventh day, the storm broke. The sun came out, a pale, watery disk in a gray sky. It shone on a world encased in ice. The landscape was silent and still. A long-range drone sweep showed devastation. Several smaller survivor camps in the nearby town were gone, just snow-covered lumps. Even the military base, the one that had acted so superior, had taken a hard hit. The drone feed showed a gaping hole in their outer wall and signs of a massive firefight. One of their forward outposts was completely overrun, a dark smudge of frozen bodies, both human and zombie. They were vulnerable. That evening, I had the prisoners brought to the main gate. They were given back their single rifle, 5 bullets, and a small pack with 2 days' worth of MREs for the group. They stood before me, huddled together. Zhao stood at my side, her rifle held loosely. Jessica, leaning on a makeshift crutch, looked at me. The fire in her eyes was long dead. Why? She asked. Her voice was rough. Why what? I asked, my tone flat. Why didn't I kill you? Or why am I letting you go? She didn't answer, she just looked at me. Because you're not worth the bullet, I said. And you're not worth the food to keep you here. You came here demanding I share what was mine because you felt entitled to it. Now you know what it costs to survive out there. Go. I turned and walked back inside without a second look. The heavy gate boomed shut behind me. They were no longer my problem. They were just more ghosts in a dead world, armed with the terrible knowledge of what heaven looked like, and that its gates were forever closed to them. Back in the command center, the inner circle was assembled. The mood was pragmatic. The test was a success, Maya said, pointing to a diagnostic screen. The turrets performed flawlessly. The dogs are effective deterrents. But the fence is a vulnerability. The military base lost their forward outpost, Zhao added, marking a spot on the digital map. That outpost was a communications relay, but it was also a small motor pool and armory. They had 2 armored personnel carriers. Hummers. Maybe a Bradley, if intelligence was right. She looked at me. They're too busy licking their wounds at their main base to worry about a lost outpost. If we move fast, we can salvage the hardware. I looked at the map. The outpost was 20 miles away. To go there would be a risk. But the reward, I thought of the Humvees, the heavy machine guns, the potential for a Bradley fighting vehicle. With my ability, one vehicle became a fleet. One heavy weapon became an arsenal. We had built a fortress. Now it was time to forge a sword. Sarah, I said, prepare a 3-day supply of field rations. Maya, get the salvage drone and the heavy transport vehicle ready. Zhao, you're planning the route. My eyes went back to the monitor showing the empty snowfield outside my gate. The world was quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet. It was the quiet of a workshop, just before the real work begins. The August sun was a hammer. It beat down on the blacktop of the access road until the tar grew soft, turning sticky under the weight of the heat. The air outside the compound walls shimmered, a visible distortion that made the dead trees at the edge of the valley dance. It was 123 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature that cooked the world. From the command center, I watched it all on a high-definition screen. The air inside was a steady 68 degrees. A low hum, the sound of the geothermal exchange system and the air conditioning units I had duplicated, was the only noise. It was the sound of civilization. A small window on my main monitor showed a perimeter camera feed. A creature stumbled into view. Its skin was baked and peeling, stretched tight over bone. As it shambled forward, it coughed, a wet, hacking sound. A thick, yellowish fluid arced from its mouth, spattering against the concrete base of the fence. The liquid smoked on contact. A small patch of the surface fizzed and pitted, eaten away. An acid spitter, a new feature of this world. I made a mental note. The steel plating on the outer gate would need to be replaced with something more resistant. Titanium, maybe. I had the blueprint stored in my mind now, copied from a heat shield on a piece of satellite debris. It was just a matter of mental energy. My power had changed after the blizzard. During the salvage trip to the overrun military outpost, I had found it. A Bradley fighting vehicle, half buried in a snowdrift, its hull breached by an explosion. I placed my hand on its cold, damaged armor. I didn't try to copy it. I just tried to understand it. To scan it. The effort was immense. It felt like my brain was being pulled through a pinhole. A wave of blackness had washed over me, and Zhao had to drag me back to the transport. But when I woke up, something was different. The strain was no longer in my muscles. It was behind my eyes. A deep, thrumming reservoir of mental force. I stood up and walked to the workshop adjacent to the command center. Maya didn't look up from her console, her focus on schematics for a new series of robotic sentries. I picked up a small, complex motorcycle engine we'd salvage. Before, copying it would have left me breathless and drained for an hour. I held it, focused on the blueprint in my mind. For a moment, my vision swam. The pressure built behind my temples. My hand on the workbench beside the engine glowed with a faint internal light. A perfect, gleaming copy of the engine materialized on the table. No sound, no flash. It just was. I felt tired, the way one feels after a difficult exam, but my body was fine. Level 4. The ability to replicate entire machines. My potential was no longer just about supplies. It was about industry. Perimeter alert. Zone 3, Zhao's voice came over the intercom, sharp and clear. I walked back to my chair. On the main screen, a new feed appeared. Two figures, running. They wore the tattered remains of army fatigues. They stumbled through the shimmering heat, looking over their shoulders. Not at zombies. At something else. They were being hunted. One vehicle approaching. Standard Army Humvee, Maya reported, her fingers flying across her keyboard, bringing up a magnified view. 4 occupants, armed. The Humvee roared up the single-access road, kicking up a cloud of dust. It skidded to a halt 100 yards from our gate. The 2 runners dove into a shallow ditch on the side of the road. 4 soldiers got out of the Humvee. They carried standard M4 rifles. Their movements were confident, arrogant. The man in the lead, an officer with captain's bars on his collar, scanned our high, featureless walls. He saw a civilian compound, fortified but still just civilian. He couldn't see the sentry turrets nestled in their recessed housings. He couldn't see the command center buried 60 feet below ground. He saw a hard shell, and he assumed it was hollow. He raised a megaphone, his voice, tinny and distorted by the electronics, cut through the oppressive heat. "This is Captain Miller, U.S. Army. The 2 individuals you see in that ditch are fugitives. They are to be surrendered to our custody immediately. Comply, and we will leave you in peace." I looked at Zhao. She met my gaze, one eyebrow slightly raised. She was waiting for my order. "He thinks he's giving an order," Maya murmured, a smirk playing on her lips as she monitored the Humvee's radio frequency. "He's telling his men they have 5 minutes before they breach the gate." I didn't answer them. I reached for a different control panel. A large, unlabeled red button sat under a clear plastic safety cover. I flipped the cover up. My finger rested on the button. "Zhao," I said. "Open Bay 1. Copy," she replied. Outside, a section of the sloped concrete that looked like a simple drainage culvert began to move. 2 massive, reinforced steel doors ground open, revealing a dark, cavernous tunnel leading down into the earth. The soldiers by the Humvee turned, their rifles half raised in alarm. They stared at the black opening. I pressed the red button. A low rumble started, a sound that vibrated up from the ground itself. It was the sound of a diesel engine far larger than the one in their Humvee. Then, the noise grew into a deep, guttural roar. Metal tracks scraped against the concrete ramp. From the darkness of the tunnel, the Bradley emerged. It wasn't the broken one I had scanned. This one was perfect. Flawless. The olive drab paint was fresh, the tracks were clean, and the 25mm autocannon mounted on its turret gleamed in the harsh sunlight. It rolled out of the bay and came to a stop on the perimeter road, its armored chassis blocking the path back to the main gate. It was a predator appearing in a sheep pasture. The 4 soldiers froze. Captain Miller's megaphone fell from his hand, clattering on the asphalt. Their faces, seen through the drone's high-zoom camera, were masks of disbelief. This was not in their rulebook. This was not a variable they had ever considered. I took the microphone. I didn't use the loudspeakers. I used the Bradley's own comms, a directional broadcast aimed straight at them. My voice was calm, amplified and metallic through the vehicle's external speaker. "You have 60 seconds to be off my property." The turret on the Bradley began to turn. It wasn't fast. It was slow, deliberate, a movement powered by silent, heavy hydraulics. The sound was a low, powerful hum. The black muzzle of the M242 Bushmaster cannon swiveled until it was pointed directly at the engine block of their Humvee. Captain Miller didn't need 60 seconds. He didn't even speak. He scrambled for the driver's side door, yelling at his men. They piled into the vehicle, a clumsy, panicked mob. The Humvee's engine screamed as it performed a desperate 3-point turn on the narrow road. It sped away, leaving a plume of dust and humiliation hanging in the hot air. The 2 fugitives in the ditch stared, first at the retreating Humvee, then at the Bradley, then at the silent, imposing wall. I watched the Humvee disappear. On a secondary screen, Maya had a drone tracking it. "They're not stopping," she said. "They're heading straight back to their base." "It doesn't matter," I said. I directed a small rover bot to approach the ditch. It dropped a pack containing 2 MREs, a gallon of water, and a basic map marking zombie-heavy zones to the south. "That's all?" Ava, our doctor, asked from the doorway. She had been watching the whole affair. "We're not bringing them in?" "They're not our problem," I said, turning off the monitor showing the 2 fugitives grabbing the pack. "Their problem is with the military. Bringing them in means bringing that fight here. I have no interest in their war." I shut down the exterior systems and sealed the bay doors. The Bradley retreated back into its underground pen. The show was over. Later that evening, the oppressive heat of the day finally began to fade. I walked through the new sections of the bunker. The expansion had been my priority since my power evolved. One level down from the command center, a new corridor opened up. The air here was cool and smelled faintly of chlorine. To the left was the gym, fully equipped with treadmills, weight racks, and cable machines, all perfect copies of high-end equipment from a catalog I'd found. The lights were low, and the room was empty. Further down the hall, I heard the sound of splashing water and laughter. I stopped at the doorway. A large, tiled room contained a swimming pool, its water a brilliant blue under the recessed lighting. Steam rose in gentle wisps from the surface. The water was heated to a constant 90 degrees. Ava and Maya were there, floating on their backs. Zhao was doing methodical laps, her movements clean and efficient. They stopped when they saw me. The water's perfect, Liam, Ava said, a genuine smile on her face. A smile I hadn't seen in a long time. Maya has a movie night planned, Zhao added, treading water. She duplicated a server full of them. We have every film from before the collapse. I just nodded. This was the point, not the tank, not the guns, not the power politics with a dying army. This, the heated pool, the air conditioning, the movie nights, a slice of the old world made impenetrable, a fortress built not just for survival, but for comfort, a heaven in the middle of hell. My eyes went to a monitor on the wall, showing the drone feed. It was still tracking the Humvee. It had arrived at the main military installation, a sprawling complex 20 miles away. I watched as Captain Miller reported to a senior officer. I couldn't hear their words, but I saw the senior officer's face. I saw the way his eyes widened as Miller described what he had seen. It wasn't fear on his face. It was avarice, the look of a king who has just discovered a rival kingdom, small but impossibly rich, sitting right on his border. He turned and barked an order to an aide. The visit was over, but the war had just been announced. October, the world outside the filtration vents was the color of rust. A fine, amber dust hung in the air, a constant haze that blurred the edges of the dead trees in the valley. It never settled. It coated every surface, found its way into every unsecured crevice. Ava's analysis of a sample showed it was silica mixed with something else, some industrial byproduct thrown into the atmosphere during the collapse. It scraped the lungs. Prolonged exposure led to coughing fits, then bleeding. Another slow, grinding way for the world to kill you. Inside the compound, the air was scrubbed clean. The hum of the life support systems in the bunker was the only constant sound. It was the sound of being alive. On the main monitor in the command center, I watched a feed from a perimeter camera. A small group of shamblers had learned something. One of them, its flesh hanging in dry strips, picked up a heavy rock. It held it in two hands. It did not try to throw it. It walked to the concrete base of the fence and began to beat the rock against the wall. A dull, rhythmic thud. Thud, thud. It wasn't intelligent. It was mimicry. It saw a barrier, and it was using a tool to try and break it. An evolution. I made a note. The automated turrets needed to be reprogrammed. Their threat priority matrix had to be updated to include tool usage. Contact, Zhao's voice said, not through the intercom, but from the chair beside me. Single vehicle, approaching on the main road. The same Humvee as before. I brought the main access camera feed to the large screen. The Humvee kicked up a cloud of the rust-colored dust. It was cleaner this time. It stopped 100 yards from the gate, in the exact same spot Captain Miller had. The engine was left running. 3 men got out. One of them was Miller. He stayed by the vehicle, his arms crossed. He did not look at the gate. He looked at the ground. The man who took the lead was older, taller. His uniform was an immaculate Class A, a foolish choice for the dust-choked outdoors. Polished brass insignia on his collar marked him as a major. His boots were shined to a mirror finish. He walked with a stiff, practiced gait, as if he were on a parade ground and not the last broken road on earth. He was followed by a younger soldier carrying a briefcase. Major Thorne, Maya said from her station, her voice flat. Records show he was the base executive officer at Fort Jackson. A paper pusher, a politician in a uniform. I watched them. Thorne stopped 30 yards from the gate. He did not use a megaphone. He simply stood there, waiting. He expected to be received. An act of pure, unearned confidence. Let them in, I said. Zhao looked at me, a single, sharp glance. She nodded. Surface level only. Reception hall B. All have a 4-bot escort team. No, I said. Just you. And bring them down to the residence level. Use the main elevator. Maya's fingers stopped moving on her keyboard. She turned her head slightly. Ava, who had entered the command center with a medical report, paused by the door. Granting an unknown party access to the core of our living space was a breach of every protocol we had established. He wants to see power, I said, my eyes fixed on the screen. We will show him power. The outer gate hissed open. A small, wheeled drone rolled out and stopped in front of Major Thorne. Its speakers crackled. You may approach. You and your aide only. Captain Miller will remain with the vehicle. You will be unarmed. Thorne glanced at his aide, who opened the briefcase. The Major placed his sidearm inside. He gave a curt nod. They walked through the gate into the decontamination chamber. The heavy steel door slid shut behind them. 10 minutes later, the elevator doors opened into the reception lounge on level 3. The air that greeted them was cool and clean. The lounge was paneled in dark cherry wood I had scanned from a CEO's office downtown. The floor was polished marble. Deep leather armchairs were arranged around a thick oak table. In the center of the table was a pot of coffee, steam curling from its spout. 2 ceramic mugs sat beside it. Zhao stood by the elevator, her hand resting near the pistol on her hip. I was standing by the large, wall-mounted screen, which was currently off. Major Thorne stopped. His eyes took in the room. He saw the wood, the marble, the comfortable furniture. He saw the clean, well-lit hallway stretching away from the lounge. His aide, a young lieutenant, stared openly, his mouth slightly ajar. They had not expected this. They had expected a concrete box full of jumpy survivors. I gestured to the chairs. Major Thorne's composure returned. He sat, his back ramrod straight. The lieutenant sat beside him, placing the briefcase on his lap. Zhao remained standing, a silent guard. I picked up the carafe and poured the black liquid into a mug. I pushed it across the table toward Thorne. He looked at the coffee. He looked at me. Is this real? Yes, I said. He picked up the mug. He did not drink. He just held it, feeling the warmth. Finally, he set it down. He looked me in the eye. For a moment, I focused my will, the unseen pressure that came with my power. A bead of sweat traced a path down his temple, cutting a clean line through the fine layer of dust on his skin. He stiffened, a flicker of unease in his eyes, but he couldn't identify the source. I am Major Thorne, he began, his voice a practiced baritone. Acting Commander of the Fort Jackson Reconstruction Authority. We are what's left of the United States government in this region. I did not respond. I waited. He cleared his throat. Liam, that is your name, correct? We have a file. Ex-office worker. No military record. No special skills noted. He gave me a thin smile. It did not reach his eyes. Clearly, our file is incomplete. The lieutenant beside him opened the briefcase. He took out a single sheet of paper with a formal letterhead. He slid it across the table. By the authority vested in me by the Emergency Powers Act, and in the interest of national security and coordinated human survival, Thorne said, his voice rising in volume, becoming the voice of a man used to giving speeches. I am here to serve you with a wartime requisition order. All assets, resources, technologies, armaments, and facilities currently under your control are hereby conscripted for federal use. You and your personnel will be integrated into the Fort Jackson command structure. Your technical skills will be put to use for the greater good. This is not a request. It is a directive, he finished. The silence in the room was heavy. The only sound was the low hum of the air recyclers. The lieutenant stared at me, his expression a mixture of arrogance and anticipation. Thorne sat back, confident, as if the matter was now settled. I did not look at the paper. I looked at Major Thorne. I leaned forward and picked up a remote from the table. I pressed a single button. The large screen behind me flickered to life. It was a live feed. The image was crisp, illuminated by bright, clean industrial lighting. It showed a cavern, a vast, man-made space that dwarfed the reception hall. The camera began a slow, deliberate pan to the right. Lined up in perfect, immaculate rows were machines of war. The first row was M2 Bradley fighting vehicles. Not one, 20 of them. Their olive drab paint was pristine. Their 25mm cannons were all pointed in the same direction. The camera continued its slow pan. The next row was M1 Abrams main battle tanks. Their long, powerful main guns seemed to absorb the light. There were 15 of them. Behind them, another 20. And another. The cavern stretched on, rows upon rows of them, a silent, steel army waiting underground. The camera tilted up, showing the sheer scale of the hangar. A place that could not possibly exist according to any rational geological survey of the area. Major Thorn's face had gone pale. The confident, commanding posture had vanished. He was leaning forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. His knuckles were white. The lieutenant had forgotten to breathe. His eyes were wide, fixed on the screen, reflecting the impossible sight. The camera feed switched. Now it showed another hangar. This one was filled with transport. Humvees, 5-ton trucks, fuel tankers, dozens of each, all looking like they had just rolled off the assembly line. The feed switched again. A smaller room, racks of rifles, M4s, M16s, sniper systems, crates of ammunition stacked to the ceiling, grenades, claymores, rockets. It was not an arsenal. It was the inventory of a small nation. The screen went black. I placed the remote back on the table. The click of the plastic hitting the wood was loud in the sudden silence. I met Major Thorn's gaze. His eyes were no longer appraising. They were terrified. "You said, requisition?" I asked. My voice was quiet. "With this quantity, Major, who do you think should be requisitioning from whom?" Thorn did not answer. He couldn't. His throat worked, but no sound came out. The paper order on the table suddenly seemed like a child's drawing. A meaningless piece of pulp. The authority he represented, the old world of paper and position, had just crashed head-on into the new world of absolute, undeniable power. I stood up. "Zhao, see them out." Zhao moved. She did not have to draw her weapon. Her presence was enough. The lieutenant flinched as she walked past him. He scrambled to his feet, fumbling with the briefcase. Major Thorn rose slowly, like an old man. He did not look at me again. He looked at the black screen, as if he could still see the army that slept beneath his feet. I watched on a monitor as they were escorted back to the surface. Their walk was different now. It was not confident. It was the walk of men who had just looked into the abyss and seen a mirror image of their own military might, but larger, and in the hands of one man. They got into their Humvee and sped away, their retreat far more panicked than their arrival. Later, I walked down to Workshop Delta. The new cavern, hollowed out over the last 2 months, smelled of ozone and hot metal. The space was the size of a football field. Here, there was no pretense of comfort. There was only industry. Maya was on a raised gantry, directing a set of heavy robotic arms. They moved with precise, fluid motions, welding a thick plate of replicated titanium alloy onto the chassis of a new troop carrier of her own design. It was lower, wider, and better armored than a standard APC. She was not just copying the old world, she was improving it. "The new power relays are stable," she said without turning around, her eyes fixed on the laser welding seams. "We can run 3 assembly lines simultaneously now. The bottleneck isn't power anymore. It's your mental stamina." "I'll manage," I said. We stood there for a moment, watching the machine take shape. This was the true source of my security. Not the tanks themselves, but the ability to create them. The factory. The drone tracked Thorn's Humvee all the way back to Fort Jackson. In the command center, we watched the feed projected onto the main screen. Ava was there. So was Zhao. We saw Thorn and his aide hurry into the main command building. The drone's optics, zoomed in through a second-story window, showed a meeting room. A man with a general star on his collar sat at the head of a long table. We watched Thorn make his report. We couldn't hear the words, but we didn't need to. We saw the shock on the faces of the other officers. We saw the general lean forward, his expression shifting from disbelief to something else. It was the same look I had seen on his subordinate's face 2 months ago. Avarice, hunger, the raw, desperate craving for power. He slammed his hand on the table. He started barking orders. An aide rushed out of the room. The general stood up and walked to a large tactical map on the wall. He pointed. His finger rested on a spot 20 miles south of their position. Our position. On the live feed from the base's motor pool, we saw the covers coming off the tanks. Diesel engines coughed to life, spewing black smoke into the dusty air. The ground crews were moving fast. A mobilization had begun. The general wanted my factory. He was willing to risk his army to get it. The war had been announced. Now, it was coming. The war did not start with a scream. It started with a low hum that vibrated up through the concrete floor. The lights in the command center flickered once. On the seismic sensor display, a neat row of red spikes appeared, one after another. Boom, 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 boom. The sound followed a half-second later. Not sharp cracks, but deep, gut-thumping coughs that rolled through the valley. Artillery. Impacts recorded. Maya's voice was level, her eyes on a different screen. Zone Delta 7. As predicted, I watched the feed from a drone hovering high above. The first shell hit the earth, throwing up a geyser of rock and rust-colored dirt. Then another, and another. They walked the shells across a patch of empty ground a mile north of our real perimeter. On that ground sat a collection of decoys, plywood silhouettes of guard towers, a few empty shipping containers I'd replicated and airlifted into place, the scorched shell of a truck, a false front. They were shelling ghosts. I watched the display tracking their ammunition expenditure. Each red spike on my sensor was a green icon vanishing from their estimated inventory. They were firing 155mm shells. Heavy, expensive, hard to move. Each one was a massive drain on their fragile supply chain. 16 rounds, Zhao said, standing beside my chair. She held a tablet displaying our own defensive layouts. They're methodical, firing for effect on a target that isn't there. Let them, I said. I touched a control on my console, switching the main screen's view. The camera zoomed in on the general's mobilization area, 10 miles away. I saw the line of M109 howitzers, crews working in practiced unison. Behind them, the staging ground was a hive of activity. Tanks revving their engines, trucks being loaded, men in formation. It was a textbook military operation. An antique, morning fog clung to the low ground, thick and wet. The November air was cold enough to show the breath of every soldier. The world outside was dying from the cold and the dust, and these men were spending their energy to throw steel at an empty field. A new icon appeared on my tactical map. A long convoy of vehicles had detached from the main force and was moving east, along a broken secondary road. It was their logistics train. 6 heavy fuel tankers, a dozen trucks piled high with ammunition crates, a mobile kitchen, the army's stomach and its bloodline, all trundling along, exposed. Ava, I said into the comms. Status on the swarm. Swarm units 1 through 12 are prepped and hot. Her voice came back, clear and professional. She was in the sub-level robotics bay, the real heart of our manufacturing. Payloads attached. Flight plans uploaded. Ready on your mark. I looked at Zhao. Their advance will have to cross the old riverbed. There's a bottleneck at the collapsed bridge. They'll be slow there. Zhao nodded. She pointed at a spot on the tablet. The high ground on the west bank gives perfect cover from visual observation. Air-burst munitions from our turrets can pin their infantry if they try to deploy. We won't need to, I said. No ground engagement, not yet. The artillery barrage stopped. The silence that followed felt heavy. On the drone feed, I saw the first of their ground assets begin to move. A spearhead of 2 Abrams tanks and 4 Bradley fighting vehicles lumbered forward, churning the dusty earth. They were advancing toward the field of smoking craters. Cautious, professional, pointless. Maya, bring the factory to full power. I want another 20 tons of steel processed. Start printing shells for the Mark IV turrets. They've given us the blueprints. Understood, she replied. The lights dimmed for a fraction of a second as the massive power relays diverted energy to the underground foundries. I turned my attention back to the logistics convoy. They were nearing the bottleneck. I opened the control interface for the swarm. 12 windows appeared on my screen, each one a first-person view from a small, jet-black drone. They were Maya's design, a carbon composite body, a near-silent electric motor, and a simple payload clamp on the underside. Each one carried a single, replicated mortar shell, fitted with a custom-built magnetic trigger. Launch, I said. From a concealed silo 2 miles away from the main complex, 12 panels slid open. The drones lifted into the foggy air, their movements fast and precise. They rose above the fog bank, into the thin, amber sunlight, then banked east. They were small enough that a ground observer would mistake them for birds. If they could even see them. I watched through the lead drone's camera. The convoy was below, crawling through the wreckage of the old bridge, just as Zhao had predicted. The fuel tankers were in the middle of the line, fat, slow-moving targets. My fingers moved over the console. I drew a targeting box around the lead tanker. I designated it Target 1. The second, Target 2. The third, Target 3. The ammunition trucks behind them became 4, 5, and 6. Swarm units 1, 2, 3. Engage targets 1 through 3. Execute. 3 of the drone views tilted down sharply. They dove. The electric motors were silent. There was no warning. The lead tanker driver was probably listening to his radio, thinking about lunch. The first drone's camera feed showed the curved top of the tanker swelling to fill the screen. A red light on my control panel blinked. Proximity lock. The clamp released. The feed cut to static. On the main screen, the high-altitude drone captured the result. There was no sound, just a sudden, brilliant flower of orange fire. The tanker seemed to swell for an instant, and then it ceased to exist. The concussion blew the truck in front of it off the road. Fire and black, greasy smoke billowed into the sky. A second later, the second tanker exploded. Then the third. The chain reaction tore the center out of their convoy. The ammunition trucks, loaded with high explosives, went up next. A series of massive detonations, one after another, sent shockwaves rippling through the fog. The force of the blasts tossed other trucks around like toys. Men who had been walking beside the vehicles were simply gone. I watched the chaos through the high-altitude feed. The spearhead force, a mile ahead, ground to a halt. They had heard the explosions. They saw the smoke. Their lifeblood had just been severed, and they were stranded. The remaining 9 drones circled high above, waiting for new orders. There were none. The message had been sent. At Fort Jackson, General Miller must have been watching a similar feed. I imagined his face, the disbelief, the rage, the slow, dawning realization that he was not fighting another army. He was fighting a ghost with an inexhaustible factory. Later, I was in Workshop Delta. The air smelled of hot steel and cutting fluid. A row of massive robotic arms were working on a new artillery piece. My new artillery piece. Maya was supervising from a gantry, her eyes scanning lines of code on a floating holographic display. We had recovered a shell fragment from their barrage. I had held it in my hand, scanned it, and in my mind, the complete blueprint of a 155mm M795 high-explosive round now existed. The composition is standard, I said, watching the automated lathe carve the shell casing from a solid block of replicated steel. TNT and ammonium nitrate filler. We can produce the chemical compounds in Lab B. We can make 1,000 of these by morning. The fuse mechanism is the complex part, Maya said, not looking down. The timing circuits require gold traces. And we need to replicate the propellant charges precisely, or the ballistics will be off. Give me the requirements, I said. I'll get you the materials. That was the difference. General Miller had to ship his shells from some dusty, pre-collapse depot 100 miles away, burning fuel he couldn't replace. I just had to feel a little tired. He was playing by the old rules of logistics. I was the source. His war machine got weaker with every shot fired, every mile driven. Mine got stronger. The war had become a math problem. And I was the only one who had all the variables. A quiet chime sounded on my personal datapad. Not an alarm, a specific, encrypted frequency I had set up for a single purpose. A long shot. I walked to a quiet corner of the workshop, away from the noise of the machines. The message was text only. No voice, no video. Sender ID, CM4420. Message, they know, they understand what you did. The general is unhinged. He's blaming me. He sees this as a personal failure. His response will not be rational. CM4420. Captain Miller, the man Thorne had left at the gate. The one soldier who looked like he understood the new world. I typed a reply. What response? The answer came back almost instantly. He's unleashing them. The assets. The ones they keep on ice. The ones who don't follow standard regs. He says if conventional warfare fails, he'll use unconventional assets. God help us all. They are moving now. I closed the message. I walked back to the command center. Zhao was still there, monitoring the stalled enemy spearhead. Patch me into Drone 7, I said. The one still over their main camp. Thermal imaging. The screen flickered, the amber world turning into a ghostly landscape of black and white. Heat signatures glowed white. The engines of the tanks were bright blobs. The soldiers were smaller, moving figures. Then I saw them. 3 figures detaching from the command building. They were moving fast. Too fast. Their heat signatures were different. Brighter. More intense. They weren't riding in a vehicle. They were moving on foot, heading in our direction at a speed that a normal man couldn't maintain for more than a minute. The drone operator, one of Maya's improved eyes, zoomed in. The image was grainy, distorted by distance and thermals. But I could see enough. One of them seemed to blur at the edges as it moved, its form momentarily stretching and snapping back into place. Another one ran beside a concrete wall, and I saw a chunk of the wall crack and fall away, as if struck by an invisible hammer. The third one stopped, in the middle of the open yard, and looked straight up. straight at the drone, 6,000 feet above. The drone's camera feed dissolved into a blast of pure, white static. A single, piercing squeal erupted from the speakers before the connection died. The screen went black. The general's new pieces were on the board. He had given up on shelling my ghosts. He was sending his monsters instead. The screen was black. A single red error code pulsed in the corner. Signal lost. It was not a hardware failure. The connection had been severed from the other end. Violently. A drone 6,000 feet up does not just go offline. It is killed. I stared at the black rectangle. The low hum of the servers in the command center was the only sound. 3 heat signatures, brighter than normal men, moving with unnatural speed. One of them had looked up, and the signal was gone. Bring up the perimeter sensors, I said. My voice was level. Ava stood at her station, her posture unchanged, but I saw her fingers tighten around the edge of her console. Full spectrum. I want to see anything that moves between here and their camp. Sensors are up. Maya's voice came over the comms from the med bay. Cool. Analytical. No contacts within a 5-mile radius. Yet, I switched the main view to another high-altitude drone, this one circling further west. The thermal image showed General Miller's camp. The fires they had built for warmth were flickering weakly. The heat signatures of the men were clustered, not moving in patrols, but huddled in groups. The stalled spearhead force was a collection of cold metal lumps a mile from their lines. Stranded, their supply line was a column of smoke and ruin miles away. Their war machine was freezing to death. Something new appeared on the screen. Small, white flecks drifting down. At first, I thought it was ash. But it was uniform, widespread. It's snowing, Ava said. Of course, it was. The second hammer blow of the changing world. The temperature had been dropping all day. Now the moisture in the air was crystallizing and falling. For us, in our climate-controlled bunker, it was a number on a screen. For the men in that camp, it was a death sentence. I watched the screen for a long time. The flecks became a sheet. The white of the snow began to obscure the white of the heat signatures. A slow, quiet erasure. The general's assets were out there, in that storm, coming for me. Sophia, I said into my compad. Here, her voice chirped, laced with the background noise of machinery. The amplification device, the one we discussed for my secondary ability. What's its status? The resonance chamber is calibrated. The focusing array is tricky. It's like trying to build a megaphone for a whisper. But it works. In theory, it should take your existing suppression field and project it, turn it from a close contact pressure into a wide area wave of unease. Despair, maybe? It draws a lot of power. Bring it online, I said. Connect it to the main power grid. I want it active in 5 minutes. Ooh, a field test. On it. I turned to Ava. The general sent his freaks. 3 of them. One is a psychic. Ava didn't flinch. She simply tapped her earpiece. G2 Squad, status. Units 1 through 4, charged and armed. Standing by at Gate B, a synthesized voice replied from the speakers. Our new combat robots. Sophia's masterpiece, built from replicated alloys and high-grade servos. They were faster, stronger, and more accurate than any human soldier. They did not feel fear. They did not feel the cold. They will approach on foot, I said. They're fast. They'll likely try to breach the outer wall at its weakest point, the old northern gate. The kill zone is already mapped, Ava stated. She brought up a schematic of the northern approach. Red targeting cones from 4 concealed turret positions overlapped in the middle of the road. Anything entering that zone will be torn apart. These aren't normal soldiers. Their abilities are unknown, other than what we saw. Do not engage them directly. Use the G2s as the first line. Pin them. Analyze them. I want to see what they can do. Ava nodded. Understood. An alert blinked on the sensor display. 3 contacts. Moving fast. 3 miles out. Their thermal signatures were still unnaturally bright, like walking furnaces in the growing storm. They were cutting through the snow-dusted woods, moving in a tight formation. They're here, Ava said. I leaned back in my chair. I closed my eyes. Sophia, now. A deep hum resonated through the floor. The lights dimmed for a full second. I felt a pressure build behind my eyes, a familiar sensation, but magnified. It was not just a focused point of will anymore. It was a wave, rolling out from me, through the concrete and steel of the base, carried by Sophia's machine. It washed over the valley. It was a signal broadcast in the language of the subconscious. A signal of dread. A signal that said this place is wrong. Turn back. You will die here. On the screen, the three bright signatures faltered. They stopped for a moment. I could almost imagine them, standing in the snow, heads tilted, feeling a sudden, inexplicable weight on their souls. But they were the general's monsters. They pressed on. They broke from the tree line 200 yards from the northern gate. The drone camera zoomed in. One man was stocky, bald. As he ran, his hands glowed with orange light. The second was a lean shape of muscle that seemed to flow over the uneven ground. The third hung back slightly. The psychic. They reached the kill zone. Engage. Ava's command was sharp. The turrets did not fire. The ground did not explode into a spray of shrapnel. Four dark shapes detached from the shadows of the outer wall. The G2S. 7 feet tall, built of black, non-reflective plating. They moved with a silent, hydraulic grace that was far more unnerving than a human soldier's sprint. They formed a perfect semicircle, blocking the path to the gate. The man with the glowing hands, torch, acted first. He raised his arms. Fire erupted. It was not a stream. It was a wave, a sheet of incandescent plasma that rolled towards the robots, melting the snow and turning the ground black in its path. The G2s did not retreat. Panels slid open on their chests and shoulders. A thick, white foam shot out, meeting the fire in midair. The chemical reaction was instantaneous. The inferno vanished, smothered under a blanket of fire-retardant material that fell to the ground like dirty snow. Before Torch could react, two G2s were on him. One pinned his arms with a steel clamp. The other drove its fist into his chest. There was a sound, a wet crunch of bone and cartilage. Torch's bright heat signature flickered and dimmed. The second evolved, Breaker, moved. He was a blur. He slammed into the lead G2. The sound was a deafening clang, like a church bell being struck with a sledgehammer. The robot was thrown back 10 feet, its chest plate dented, but its internal systems held. Breaker roared and charged again. A heavy-caliber autocannon on another G2's shoulder swiveled and fired. The sound was a staccato thump thump thump. The high-explosive rounds didn't just hit Breaker. They tore through him. He took 2 steps, his body coming apart in chunks of meat and blood, and then he fell. 2 down. It had taken less than 10 seconds. The third one, the psychic, stood alone. He didn't run. He just stood there as the remaining G2s advanced on him. He raised his head, and screamed. There was no sound from the drone's audio feed, but I felt it. A spike of pure agony lanced through my skull. It was not a thought. It was a weaponized feeling. The amplification device shrieked with a high-frequency whine. The lights in the command center flickered wildly. Maya cried out over the comms. Ava grunted, one hand pressed to her temple. My vision swam. For a second, I saw what he wanted me to see. Fire. Rot. The faces of the people I had left behind in the city, their eyes accusing. Failure. Fear. No. I gripped the arms of my chair. I pushed back, not with my hands, with my mind, my will. The dread I had broadcast was a wide net. This was a spear. I focused all the power Sophia's machine was giving me, all the cold, hard certainty that drove me, into a single point and drove it at him. The psychic's mental scream cut off. On the drone feed, he staggered. His hands went to his head. He looked confused, like a man who had suddenly forgotten his own name. He was open. A G2 unit closed the distance. It did not punch. It did not shoot. Its hand, a massive assembly of steel fingers and actuators, simply closed around the man's head. There was a pop. The man's heat signature winked out. Dead silence on the comms. Then, Sophia's breathless voice. Jesus, Landon, the energy feedback nearly melted the core. What did you do? I sent the message back, I said, rubbing my temples. A dull throb was all that remained. The battle was over. The general's monsters were just corpses in the snow. I turned my attention back to the main camp drone feed. The snow was falling harder now, a true blizzard. And something else was moving on the edge of the screen. More heat signatures. Dozens of them. No, hundreds. They were not bright. They were cold. The dead cold blue of a body with no metabolism. Zombies. Drawn by the sounds of the earlier artillery, the explosions, the lingering scent of so much living flesh trapped in one place. They were a tide of cold, shambling shapes emerging from the woods, surrounding the camp. The blizzard concealed them. The general's men wouldn't see them until they were on top of them. Their last escape route was gone. My datapad chimed, a secure message, from Captain Thorne. The assets failed. The general is dead. I shot him myself. We are out of food, out of fuel, and the dead are at the perimeter. We surrender. We will follow any orders you give. Just stop this." It was not a plea. It was a statement of fact. A mathematical conclusion. "Ava," I said, standing up. "Prep the convoy, the insulated personnel carriers. Load them with medkits and rations. We're going for a drive." She looked at me, an eyebrow raised. "To their camp? I'm not in the business of creating more zombies," I said. He lost. He admitted it. That makes him an asset, not an enemy. The ride was quiet. Our heavy, wheeled carriers cut through the deepening snow with ease. Inside, the heater kept the air warm. Through the armored glass, I saw the world outside. White, cold, hostile. When we arrived, the scene was one of Dante's frozen circles of hell. Thorne's men had formed a ragged firing line, using trucks for cover. They were firing sporadically at the shapes moving in the blizzard. The dead, their ammunition was low, their movements were sluggish from cold and hunger. Our convoy rolled to a halt. When I stepped out, followed by Ava and a squad of G2s, the soldiers stared. They saw our clean, warm gear. They saw the steam of our breath in the cold air. They saw the inhuman precision of the robots taking up guard positions. They saw a different world. Thorne walked forward to meet me. His face was gaunt, his lips cracked. He held his rifle pointed at the ground. "Price," he said. The name was a statement. "Captain," I replied, "you made the logical choice." "Logic?" He gave a short, harsh laugh. "This was never about logic. It was about pride. Miller's pride. He couldn't accept that the rules had changed. He thought he could break you with force." He gestured to the dead evolved we had brought back with us, their bodies strapped to the roof of a carrier. "He sent his gods, and you sent back their corpses." I looked past him, at the exhausted, defeated soldiers. At the vast, dysfunctional military base. The hangars. The machine shops. The barracks. "He failed because his war was expensive," I said. "Every bullet he fired made him weaker. Every bullet I fire makes me stronger, because I can just make more." Thorne nodded, a slow, dawning understanding in his eyes. He wasn't just looking at a man. He was looking at a new law of nature. "What happens now?" he asked. I looked at the sprawling camp, at the hundreds of trained soldiers and technicians. I looked at the zombie horde, a problem that my automated turrets could solve in a few hours. This wasn't a defeated enemy camp. It was an acquisition, an expansion pack. I pulled up the regional map on my datapad, the boundaries of Miller's base now flashing green, incorporated into my own territory. My domain had just grown tenfold. But it was not enough. The technology here was old. The materials were standard. To reach the next level of my ability, to replicate at the molecular level, I needed things that were not here. I needed schematics for advanced alloys, samples of rare earth elements, processors from decommissioned supercomputers. My eyes followed the lines on the map, past the captured base, towards the skeletal remains of the old world. Towards the dark, silent shapes of national research laboratories and fortified corporate R&D campuses. The war for survival was over. The war for conquest had just begun.